Make sure to smash that like button.
All right.
All right, I'm streaming.
All right. Think everything.
We think everything's going.
Okay.
Yeah, every single stream starts like that. Every stream in the world starts with. Can we all hear each other? Is the audio all right?
No, there it is. 90% dropped frames. That's what we like to. Oh fuck.
Additional technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Awful. Yeah, this is the first time I've had to stream because I've moved home from uni like this week, so I haven't really done any kind of testing.
Oh damn. Now, if these were worker co-ops running these streaming services, that'd all be working much better, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
obviously. If I could just implement communism on the internet, then it would be fast.
Yeah, it would be great.
This is common knowledge. Okay, well, I got it down to the 80 dropped frames. So,
80 dropped frames. Wow.
Well, 80%, yeah.
Okay. Are we just going to start talking then? So you guys wanted to debate communism.
Yeah, Xexizy, are you is your stream ready and stuff? Or do you need some additional?
I'm just wondering, it's probably not worth streaming if it's not going to work.
Okay. So we're going to have to...
I was just taking a quick...
Are we going to have to group and figure this out?
Well, if you guys are recording and everything, I guess we don't necessarily have to stream.
Well, I've just started the stream when you said that, so...
Right, yeah, so...
I can cancel it. I've got a few people watching, but okay. So if you guys just want to go, I won't delete or edit or anything, no matter what happens in the stream, so you can download it off my YouTube worst case scenario.
Yeah, that's all good.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right. So should we actually start talking about the thing?
Let me sorry for the delay. Let me just literally tweet out that I won't be streaming, just for people who are wondering.
Okay.
Let me know when you're
Bones,
when you're ready.
Post the link to my stream, Bones, in the chat here.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So you guys can promote my channel if you want to promote a capitalist channel. Just tweet out that link.
Shell for capitalism.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this is score one for the capitalists.
Yeah.
Socialism disappoints yet again.
Actually, because of capitalism that my internet is bad. So
I see. So it's all right. So we've had enough time waffling about nothing. Why don't you guys tell us why we should destroy society? I mean, introduce communism.
Ooh, the epic bones. Okay, Mouthy, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, sure. So, some of my basic objections to capitalism, I guess I'll just give mine and then Xexizy can give his. Some of the basic objections to capitalism that I wanted to bring up was that, for one, capitalism seems to work in a fundamentally undemocratic way when it comes to the structure of the firm. And I know that you guys might say, well, I mean, if we were to introduce capitalism and worker co-ops just started to pop up naturally, that would be fine with me. But I actually have access to a paper written by Eric Olson where he goes over some data, and basically the conclusion that he comes to is the reason that there aren't so many democratically controlled businesses under a capitalist society aren't because of government regulations or anything like that, but rather because there are just fundamental disincentives to their creation. For example, obviously an investor is disincentivized from investing in a worker co-op because they don't offer outside control, so that worker co-ops typically have to rely on loans and so on. So I think that the way that capitalism works, insofar as we're just using the basic definition of producing things to be exchanged on a market and so on, this is fundamentally incentivizes a dictatorial structure of the enterprise. I think if you're trying to organize society in a way that works for the majority of people, I think organizing that society such that the majority of people don't have any say in the decisions that impact their lives in massive ways is kind of a weird and absurd way to organize a society. I also think that capitalism promotes tremendous inequality pretty much wherever capitalism has existed. There's been large degrees of wealth inequality. I think that this is detrimental for a number of reasons. For one, it's simply a misallocation of resources insofar as we're trying to allocate resources in a society in a way that makes as many people as well off as possible. And two, it leads to a lot of broader negative externalities, such as higher levels of wealth inequality being correlated with like higher crime rates and lack of social cohesion and so on. And my final point would be that capitalism produces fundamentally for profit, and the problem with that is very often what's profitable is contrary to the interests of humanity. So, for example, you'll have capitalists arming, radical groups in the Middle East, further destabilizing the region, because even though it runs contrary to the interests of humanity and global society as a whole, it's profitable to do so. Climate change is also in part a product of that. So I think it's just like a weird way to organize society. If you're trying to organize a society in the interests of humanity, I think it's a weird way to organize that in such a way that we're producing for profit, which often is contrary to the interests of humanity. And so I guess those are just the basic points that I wanted to lay it out.
It's a weird way to what? Bones?
It's a weird way to organize things, right? And it's like because profit is sometimes contrary. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Xexizy, what did you want to lay out now?
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll just say that pretty much all of my main arguments for today are going to come from one book. If you're interested, it's not Capital. It's Capital's little brother, Wage, Labor, and Capital. So if you wanna, read more about the things I'm talking about today, or just generally have a good introduction to Marx, that's what I would recommend. So the main two arguments from this book that I'll be leading with is one, that I believe capitalism is antithetical to free time and doing what you want to do with your free time and your life, mainly due to the fact that capitalism demands as much profit be made as possible above all else, right? That is the prime objective of capital, is to expand, is to make profit. And it has no regard, therefore, for the interests of human life, what people would rather be doing instead of continually producing things to be sold for a profit. And as such, when you contrast capitalism with previous modes of production in history, for instance, feudalism, you'll see that in these older modes of production, generally what would happen is people would produce what they need in order to survive, in order to sustain themselves, and then that would be it. Under capitalism, what we see is instead of hitting this point of what we need to survive and what we need to have things like, stocks to fall back on and all of these things, capitalism is all about producing as much surplus as possible, and surplus in the sense that it really not surplus above the bare minimum of what you need just right here and now, but surplus in that it serves no useful purpose other than it can be sold for a profit. That's not, of course, to say that I would prefer feudalism. Of course, even though feudalism was still based on what's just needed and what's useful, obviously peasants would be working often longer and harder than we do today, but that's due to technology, not due to the social systems that they had. So I believe that capitalism essentially is preventing us from really enjoying our own lives, right? It's demanding that we constantly produce for it, for the sake of it, for its own sake, just to expand. Secondly, I believe that capitalism is fundamentally unstable, that it will inherently lead to crises again and again that itself reproduces, even if in its most pure of states. And the main way, well, one of the main ways in which this happens is due to what's called the falling rate of profit, of which there are several contributing factors. And there's the simplest one. When I say falling rate of profit, I mean the rate at which capitalists gain back profit from the goods that they sell compared to the cost of production and the investment into it over time gets lower and lower and lower until they make a lower return. The main way in which this happens is, well, not the main way, but one of the simplest ways to explain what this happens is the advent of new technology. We can go into more detail into this process later, but a very high level overview would just be that once new technology enters a market and becomes generalized in a market, of course, this reduces the amount of time that's required to produce a certain good. So let's say it halves it. Now, if we assume no other factors change, then we could say that this is going to end up halving the end price that the product gets sold for on the market, right? Because you can produce it a lot faster now. You can therefore sell it for a lot less. And this is obviously, this is great because when you introduce competition, that means that different producers will compete with each other to push down the price to a new lower cost of production. The cost of production is now lower, of course, because of this new technology. What this does mean is that the rate of profit that you're making on each individual item that you're selling is now lower, and this means you need to sell. Again, if it's half, then this means that you have to sell double the amount of product to make the same amount of profit that you were before. And this process continually goes on and on and on until we have to sell ridiculous amounts of products in order to keep capitalism afloat. But of course, there comes a point when this is no longer possible and capitalism can't support itself in this way. And there is actually empirical evidence, again, to suggest that the rate of profit is observed to be falling. So this is backed by reality as well. So those are my two main points, which I'm happy to delve more detail into.
Okay, so we've had a bit of a rant, and there's a lot of points that I want to hit there.
Of course.
Okay.
Do you want to go first there, Danny? Then?
Yeah, I feel like I want to hit a couple of points. I'll let you go soon. Don't worry. I won't get everything. I'll leave some for you.
Okay.
All right. So one of the main things that kept popping up was this idea about what capital wants. That it's going to approach what achieves the most profit, and not necessarily what the people want. Not necessarily what's going to be actually useful for people. So there's two problems with that. The first one is a rather obvious thing, that technically capital doesn't want anything, right? Humans have wants and capital does not. The reason that funds and resources get allocated to various purposes in a market economy is because people want those things. Now, you might say that, okay, but it's not like the mass of people, it's just the rich people. But in fact, that seems to be false. If you look at the most successful businesses, they tend not to be making gold-plated Ferraris for the very rich. They tend to be making consumer goods for average people. The most profitable thing to do under capitalism appears to be to serve the needs of the general people. So both empirically and I think theoretically, that idea of capital as having its own wants that diverge significantly from the wants and needs of the people, I think is wrong. Additionally, there was some stuff in there about one thing Xexizy said was that if you halve the labor required for some product, that you're going to halve that's halving the cost. That's wrong. There's other things that are valuable other than labor, right? We'll obviously have to
assuming everything else stays constant for the record.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
I must have missed that then. But in any case, all right. So, yeah, there are other things that go into production. I just wanted that to be clear, whether Xexizy said it or not. Right? There are other sources of value than labor, in case that comes up. And
may I ask what those are? Sorry, not to interrupt. I'm just curious.
Sure. Yeah. So the material resources, for example, like if you have a car, it's partially labor. That's one of the costs of producing a car, is you have to expend some labor. You also have to expend some steel and probably some fuel in order to run the machines to make the car, etc. There are other costs. Now, I think I want to leave it there because I don't want to give too many points off the bat. But yeah, I think that the main problem there is that you guys are talking about things that capital wants as though it's distinct from what people want, and I don't think it is. Bones?
Mouthy, which of
Hold
those
on.
2 points would you like to?
Oh,
Hold on, you guys.
I guess I'll
We
let
both
sorry.
we both got
go
a
first.
we both get a rant.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
No,
I
you're
wanna
good.
expand a little bit on what Danny said there as well, with respect to the other things other than labor, and also like just a broad kind of concept when it comes to costs of production, right? A lot of people seem to have it in their mind, like when they talk about growth, for example, and the falling rate of return, and you have to keep making more and more of this thing. What they don't really factor in is two points. One is that improving the efficiency of cost of production, that frees up resources for other tasks. So, and like a lot of people, when they think of the economy, they imagine it as a single firm, but that's not the case, right? It's a plethora of different firms that are all doing different things, and you can kind of imagine it like if you were on a desert island, right? And I'm also going to address surplus with this as well. Imagine you're on a desert island and you have to get fish or whatever to survive, right? You need to get some food so that you can survive. Well, what you can do is you can get a surplus of fish so that you don't have to keep laboring, and then you can free up that labor that you would otherwise spend fishing on building a capital good that makes your fishing more efficient. And then you can kind of expand and keep going on like that, because historically what we've observed is that the economy has become more diverse and specialized. People are doing all kinds of different things, as opposed to I want to say even just 1,000 years ago, most of society was just agrarian, right? People just kind of grew, and they had like a general skill set for like sewing clothes and stuff like that. But now we have, programmers. We even also have low skilled positions, because usually the retort to that is, well, not everyone can get the education necessary for really high skilled labor, but new low skill jobs emerge as well. Like you see cleaners, for example, becoming more common with the advent of industrial cleaning, right? Or industrial cleaners and tools like that, floor buffers and stuff like that, or data entry specialists, right? People who input data into a database, or fast food didn't exist, 400 years ago. So you wouldn't have had like cooks in those positions as well. So what I think is missed in that respect with respect to this growth is assuming, first of all, that it always has to apply to one firm. That's not necessarily the case. The assumption that demand is somehow static, with a falling, like I actually watched a debate between Xexizy and Destiny a while back, and they were talking about widgets and how you make widgets half the cost to produce. That means you need to sell twice as much to maintain the same profit margin in a competitive market. Well, Destiny points out that maybe there's something called wadgets, which require widgets as an input good to construct the higher order good, and those only become economically feasible once widgets are sufficiently cheap. So making that higher order good cheaper also frees up resources when spent on that good. So to summarize real quick everything that I've because I feel like there's a little bit of a complicated tangent. Increased efficiency, and i.e. growth in capitalism, frees up material resources to be allocated to new tasks. So as long as scarcity is still a thing, we can keep doing that pretty much indefinitely, unless you can conclude that we've done it the best way possible in every domain. And that freed up capital and those freed up scarce resources improves people's living standards and makes people better off. So that's, I don't know, we can revisit that later, but I want to stop talking now.
Okay, all right.
Xexizy, do you want to address the falling rate of profit stuff, and then I'll address some of the other stuff? Or
Yeah, and also really quick with the labor being the source of value stuff. Just a real quick point on that.
Sure.
So first off, actually, Marx explicitly says that labor is not the source of all wealth, and that nature is just as much a source of wealth as labor is. But I found your point about your point about where value comes from other than labor quite weird. because you didn't point to nature, you pointed to previously produced goods, which must have also come from labor, right? So even though that in the isolated production of a car, you have the initial raw materials of building the car and the labor that goes into producing the car, that doesn't mean that labor hasn't been imbued within those raw materials. And even if you want to go all the way back to mining out the iron and the copper to make steel, that's still labor that goes into it. And then once we get to the raw materials, in the earth itself, then this comes back to, well, yes, nature is a source of wealth as well. But if we're talking about actually producing things as a society, or humans coming to produce something new which nature hasn't provided, then labor can only ever be the way in which that takes place. And I don't even think that's really a controversial statement, that we need labor to do things.
Sure.
So we also
So, I mean,
need
if you
time and space, right?
Yeah.
But you don't have a time
Wow, it's
theory of
almost
value
like
or space theory
labor
of value.
time. If only someone had talked about that.
Well, no, you're missing the point, right? It's that labor, sure, is a universal input in the sense that there's nothing that we value that labor of some degree isn't required. Like, even if it's an apple that naturally grows on a tree, technically is still performing some task to grasp it from the tree and bite it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's always labor in everything, but there's also always space, right, in everything. And space is a finite resource, and we value the things that we're able to do within certain amounts of space, right? So you could, if you're going to have a labor theory of value, you could also have a space theory of value, because that's a universal input also.
No, you're essentially referring to property there, aren't you?
I'm space. I'm talking about. I'm saying what I'm literally saying, that everything we do, right, everything we value requires some space. So the fact, and we don't have a space theory of value. So the fact that everything we value requires labor does not mean that value is in some way fundamentally the source of that labor is in some way fundamentally the source of all value. You don't have a space theory of value. You also shouldn't have a labor theory of value.
Well, just to butt in here, so I might be missing something, but it seems to me like, and I would like to return to some of the earlier points, but it's fine. We can talk about the labor theory of value for now. But and sorry, Xexizy, you can respond to that as well. But I just had a quick interjection here, because you seem to be saying that, like, because the labor theory of value is a theory of value, and part of it is that labor is a universal input, that means that we should also, by that same logic, have a space theory of value or whatever. But it's like the fact that labor is a universal input isn't the only reason why a labor theory of value applies. So, like, for example, in Wage, Labor, and Capital, Marx talks about how it's like the cost of production, which is just the amalgamation of living and embodied labor. The cost of production essentially is going to sort of regulate market prices, because obviously if you're a capitalist and the price of a good you're able to sell based on demand and so on falls too low, or falls too low below the cost of production, then you're going to or then you're making a large profit and you're going to produce more. But if the price goes above the cost of production, then you're not going to want to sell your good. So, like, there is reasons besides the fact that it's just a universal input why Marx thought that the labor theory of value is valid. Okay. So, yeah.
There's a couple
can I just very quickly say I actually have a quote I'd just like to read off real quick.
Sure.
That deals with this exact point about what makes labor special. Because yes, you're right that there are other universal inputs, but so here's what Marx has to say on it. So, as the exchangeable values of commodities are only social functions of those things and have nothing at all to do with the natural qualities, we must first ask, what is the common social substance of all commodities? It is labor. So that's what makes it unique. It's the fact that is commonly social.
That doesn't address it at all. Like, is
that not what you're saying? Is that why choose labor out of all of these other things?
Yeah.
Well, so hold on. Can I just really interject?
I'll let you go.
I mean, what's bothering me a little bit about this is that there seems to be this sort of equivocation between the means by which valuable things are produced and whether or not you value a thing, right? Like you can put as much labor into a thing no one wants.
Is this the
but
mud
no one
pie
wants.
argument?
Pardon?
Yeah.
More or less, yeah. But
I'm
let's,
just
let's,
saying
let's,
that-
but
that's like
maybe
the-
not everyone has heard this argument who's watching, so
Yeah,
let's
sure.
not
Yeah,
cut them
go on.
off.
I'm simply just arguing that value is subjective, right? So whether or not somebody desires something has really no, like there's no relationship between that and what means you use to produce that thing.
Additionally,
Yeah, that's completely. Sorry, yeah.
additionally, I want to actually double down on that a bit. And it comes up with another problem I'm sort of seeing here in this discussion is value is not price or a cost. Those are three different concepts. And so saying that showing how labor affects the amount of labor required affects the price is not showing that it affects value, right? It shows that it'll affect the marginal value, right? How much it's valued by the last person, the marginal buyer, the one who's just barely willing to purchase it at that price. But that's by excluding other buyers. It's not by actually changing how people value things. So price and value are different things.
Yeah, and I'd actually agree with both of those statements. but here's the thing. I mean, so within the framework of the Marxist theory, so first, in regards to the first point, and then maybe for the second point, I can defer to you, Mouthy, if you like.
Sure.
But in regards to the first point, so that's completely right, that just because we can do labor with something doesn't mean someone wants it. I can dig a hole in my garden. That's not useful to anybody. So this is where Marx makes the distinction of social labor, in that it is labor which creates something which is useful to society. Now, Marx doesn't actually care what is useful or why it is useful. He just analyzes what is useful already and talks about how these things are produced and reproduced in society, and what are the mechanisms behind that. So in terms of what people want and why people want them, it's completely out of the purview of the Marxist analysis. So when we talk about labor being the source of wealth, we're talking about labor going into something which is just assumed already to be desired and to have demand for.
Well, hold on, because it shouldn't be just assumed to be desired. You gave an example of you digging a hole in your backyard, which is not desirable, right? Nobody else wants that, except maybe
Yeah,
you.
so that wouldn't be social labor, and so
Right,
it's not what we're talking about.
Hold on, so we agree that there's a social desirability caveat. How do you determine whether or not some labor falls into that category or not?
We don't.
Would it be
It's not
because
of
of
interest to the
people-
theory.
Well, then you can't say anything about the real world with your theory, right? You have to have some way.
I think we've managed to, haven't we? I mean, because
No,
we're trying to
hold
talk
on.
about.
Not validly is what I'm saying, right? Like, so if you're not going to say, so you're going to say that this socially necessary category is a social desirability category. That's the kind of things that fall under this category are valuable, right? If you're not actually going to make any claims about what actual things in reality fall under that category, then how are you going to make any statements about the real world? You seem to just have a theoretical construct which is not applying to the real world in that case. You're like an Austrian.
I mean,
Well, because doesn't.
Oh, sorry, go.
Sorry, yeah. If you want, Matthew, yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I mean, the labor theory of value makes predictable and testable claims about the world. For example, the labor theory of value predicts that there's going to be a consistent correlation that you're going to be able to find between like labor and price. Not an exact like 1-to-1, of course, because price and value aren't the same thing. But there is going to be sort of a correlation between like cost of production or labor and price. And I mean, this has been studied several times. I mean, the Cambridge Journal of Economics studied this, found that this correlation exists. So have economists like Paul Cockshott and Alan Cottrell. But like, so like what we are predicting is like, that's what we predict. It's been found to be true. And so you can say like, yeah, but you're not telling us like what is socially necessary.
No,
like
so,
we don't have to in order to make those predictions that we make based on the labor theory of value. Like as Xexizy said, what makes something socially necessary or why people like certain things is completely out of the purview of the theory, and it's not necessary to make the claims or predictions that the theory makes and which have been found to be true.
Sure, but I think that's the thing. I think you've missed the point then here, because yes, you're right that you can find these correlations between labor input and price of a commodity. I think that's wrong for things that aren't produced, right? Like this, I can list you a whole bunch of things that would have very, very ridiculous costs, but they're just never made because they're kind of outside of our domain, right? But sure, I'll face value, but that's about production, right? That is about the creation of wealth. See, the point that I'm getting at here is when you say that, oh, it's about socially desirable labor, it's a tautology. You're just saying valuable labor is valuable. Like,
Why
wow,
is it valuable?
say
Because that's the thing. The labor
what
theory of
makes it
value
valuable.
is a theory of value. It's a theory that explains where value in
It's
society
not a
comes
theory
from.
of value, though.
But it's not.
A
It's
theory of
that's literally-
production.
No, hold on. It's not. It at best sounds like a theory of price, right? Because you're saying that socially desirable things are valuable, and then you reason from there to get to price, right?
No,
Well,
actually,
okay,
that's the second
okay.
point, which I was going to let Mouthy explain the relation.
But then how do
between
you
price
get
and
to value? Because you seem to be just
Well,
saying
that's what we're
socially
happy to
desirable.
explain.
Yeah. So
Okay, so,
So
you're yet,
basically-
just to be clear, you're yet to explain that. You haven't explained how you get to value.
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, okay,
from
go
price,
ahead.
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few points to go through here. So, first of all, the relation between value and price is, so if you're familiar with like the language of like classical economics, I don't know if either of you have read like Ricardo or Smith, but they basically referred to it as like natural prices, which basically act as the center of gravity of market prices. So value is sort of like the price of something given supply and demand are equilibrium. I know that's kind of imprecise. That's not like exact, but that's sort of just like a crude sketch of it. So like the example is like, say you're selling widgets. It takes you $10 to make widgets, and you're able to sell those widgets for $20. Because you're selling them $10 over the cost of production, you're making a profit. And if you're making a lot of profit, then more people are going to flood into the widget industry. And then you have more people selling widgets until the price goes down because of competition. And the price will tend to go back down to meet value. And if it goes too low below value because everyone's selling and the price falls below the cost production,
I'm sorry to
then
interject,
people are going to go not sell as much in the industry, and then it's going to rise back up to meet value.
I have to interject again, because again, we're equivocating between value, i.e. how so much something is desired by people, versus production. They're not the
feel like we
same
might
thing.
have
Cost-
Well, but that's because
value
you're
are not the same
equivocating
thing.
on what value means.
No,
Because
when we
I'm
talk about
explicitly not
value-
equivocating. I'm trying
So,
to distinguish
I don't.
two distinct concepts.
So you're saying, right? Your argument there was that the price is going to meet value. Now, given that different people value things to different degrees, I think that doesn't make sense unless you're going to restrict it to marginal value, right? The valuation of the marginal buyer, which is like if you're going with Ricardo, then that's what you'd say. But
just
that
to
is
interject, because the mistake that you're making here is the same mistake that the other guy was just making when he accused me of equivocating, which
Okay.
is that when you're talking about the term value, you are talking about how much people like subjectively value a given resource,
Yes,
but that's
yes.
just an equivocation, because that's not what Xexizy and I are talking about when we say value.
I
What
understand
do
that.
you mean by
Marxist
value
definition
then?
of value.
What do you mean by
I just
value?
explained it.
Well,
We
I
basically
didn't
mean the
follow,
same thing
sorry.
that Ricardo and Adam Smith meant when they talked about natural prices. It's sort of like the center of gravity of market prices. It's
So
like,
when you say value, you mean
It's the
cost?
ratio with which one commodity exchanges with another commodity.
But
So we,
okay, that's price. So those are you both
No,
just
that's
said
not
different
price.
things.
That's definitely not price.
Yes, it
How
is.
is- how- no,
The
because
amount that
price
you need
takes
to
into
exchange
account the
something.
fluctuations. No.
Right, you said the
because-
amount of something that something else exchanges for. That is literally what price means.
No, because price is that value expressed as money.
Not necessarily. You can have the apple price of bananas. How many apples trade for a banana?
Okay,
Right.
well then let's take a step back. Within the purview of Marxism, price is defined as the exchange ratio expressed in money.
Well, then you're just restricting it to one specific price, but still the same reasoning applies even in those restricted circumstances, because
Money,
that is
yeah.
still the case that, you know, the money price of anything, that's not the same as its value. It is the same as its marginal value, right? You guys say you've read some Ricardo, so it's the same as its marginal value, but it's not the same as its value to any specific person or any kind of aggregate of people.
Well, yeah, I mean, Marx makes the distinction between price and value. They're not directly the same thing.
Sure,
but
so how do you
that
get
price
value?
tends to revolve around. What do you mean? How do you get value? Like, what is value?
Yeah, so
Sure.
if the labor theory of value, usually when you say the theory of something, it is what something is and how we know, right? And if you've got the labor theory of value, but it simply says is equal to the amount of socially necessary labor used to produce it, well, then you're just kicking the can down the road. You're just saying, well, the thing doing all the work there is this concept of social desirability or social necessity. Right, that's what's doing all the heavy lifting, and then that's what I want to know, because that is really your theory of value, is whatever bits and pieces are in there.
So I think it would help if we try and reconstruct this kind of from the bottom up and how Marxism sees it. So
Okay.
essentially, if you start with just what we call exchange value, right, which is the ratio in which one commodity exchanges for another when supply and demand are at equilibrium, right? Now, the way that's translated into that exchange value is what supply and demand fluctuate around, because of course without any one fixed point, then fluctuations become meaningless due to there being no scale of relativity, right? So the way in which we transform that into price is essentially throwing all of these fluctuations of supply and demand around this central fixed point, and then that becomes the exchange value expressed in the money commodity, again with these distortions of supply and demand applied to it. So that's how we see it, right? So value is literally just essentially, right, to simplify it even further, you can say it's just the cost of production to produce a commodity, and this is the fixed point of in supply and demand. Then when you apply fluctuations and distortions in supply and demand and other such things, then you end up with price expressed in money.
Okay, I want to go through a couple of points broadly just to see if we're on the same page with some different kind of.
I just want to check, Mouthy, are you okay with that description then?
That sounds
Okay,
basically
cool.
correct.
Yeah.
So I just want to lay out a few points, and then I want to delve into them, but I really want to just see if everyone agrees with each point that I'm going to outline. Okay. All right. Okay. So the first one is that, okay, do we all agree that value, as in like the desirability of a thing, how much something is wanted, is a subjective phenomenon? Do we all agree with that?
It depends, because when we use the word value, that's reserved specifically for what I was referring to as exchange
That's why
value.
I used other terms.
Okay,
So
but
we
then
wouldn't-
can we use exchange value to mean that, seeing as how the word value is quite useful for its normal colloquial definition, where you say like, oh, I really value having X, right? So it's normal colloquial definition
Do you have any objections to that?
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, so we all agree with that. Okay. Do we all agree that money is fundamentally a commodity or service like any other?
Yes.
It's a universal commodity, yeah.
I don't know if it's universal, but it's a common commodity.
I'm not sure what that means. So okay,
you know what? It doesn't matter. Yeah, it's
there have.
commodity.
I mean, there have been situations in which people would not be willing to accept cash or money for something that they'd only want to trade.
Well, of course, but I think those are corner cases, right?
Sure,
Okay.
Those are rare cases. But I'm just saying it's not technically universal.
Okay, so we'll also say cost of production is not necessarily tied to how much a thing will be bought for, right? Because you can have a failed business, right? You can produce a thing at great cost and then no one wants it, right? We all agree on that.
Sure.
Okay, and then we also all agree that competition lowers the profit margin on a firm, right? Like to some equilibrium where it's no longer worthwhile to do that for less, right?
Sure.
Okay, so we're all on the same page with these 4 points. I think that a lot of the debate surrounding them seems to be kind of semantic, where we're just kind of getting really upset about the different terms, but the core concepts we all seem to be in agreement with. So given that, let's go back to why communism is supposed to be better than capitalism, or why capitalism is supposed to be better than communism.
Yeah, okay. I like that approach. Because I think
'Cause,
looking at the chat on my thing, people are wondering how this relates to capitalism and communism. And I get it's axioms, but yeah, we are getting pretty semantic, and we're not going to be debating this forever.
Value discussion. Then
So
Sure, I'll switch to desirability.
okay, you two were about to respond when we got into this labor theory of value stuff. You two were about to respond to the other points that we made at the start about the connection between what people want and the things that are profitable under capitalism. You had a response about that, I think, if you recall it.
Oh wait, I'm sorry.
Maybe
What
don't.
did you say?
Are you two there?
What did you say?
Yeah. Hey. Yeah.
Oh, I've lost
Yeah, can
audio.
you hear us?
Can you hear us, Danny?
Oh, sorry, I lost audio for a moment. I'm back.
Oh, okay.
Oh, cool.
So wait, because I think one of the big issues was the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. BonesTheRabbit, if that's what you like to be called.
That's fine.
Yeah, okay. Bones just made some comments about the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. I was going to let Xexizy respond to that if he wanted to, and then I was going to respond to some of the other things that were said.
If you've got something good for that, honestly, I can't really remember it.
I can't remember
what
much.
we said.
I
Do you
could
want to
reiterate
recap really shortly?
Yeah.
Before you reiterate that, actually, there's I did want either me or Mouthy to respond to this point about profitability coinciding with what people need and want.
Oh yeah. I can respond to that.
Yeah.
You can add like an additional response if you want, but I did have a response because like my basic claim is that broadly what's profitable and therefore what capitalists pursue often contradicts broadly the interests of humanity. And I don't think your response of like, oh, well, if a capitalist wants to, or if a capitalist is going to sell something, it's because certain people want it. I don't think that actually contradicts my claim. And I can give you like an example.
Okay.
Please
So
do, yeah.
let's take the example. Yeah, let's take the example of a capitalist, like, I don't know, or like a capitalist like encouraging like the government or the capitalists themselves like selling like arms to radical groups in the Middle East in order to further destabilize the region, which typically happens. It is true that they're doing it because those radical groups want those arms, but it's also true that them performing that action contradicts broadly the interests of humanity like in general, right?
Yeah, well, hold on. I just want to say first off the bat that I do agree that of the specific that action of selling arms to some undesirable groups, with the knowledge that they're going to go use it to perform some terrible actions is a bad thing. I just want to get that.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
But
Thanks,
you
Danny.
wouldn't regulate it.
Well, hold on.
But would you say that it's profitable? Because
Hold
all
on.
that really matters
Yeah.
is that it's profitable.
Sure.
Yeah,
and
I
then
would
you
say it
agree
can be
that
profitable.
something that's
I'd say that
profitable
the
can
state
contradict the
is
broad
essentially the
interests
same
of
thing.
humanity.
right. I mean,
You say what is essentially the same thing?
The state, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They're actually a terrorist organization that
More or less,
causes-
yeah.
But
Yeah,
that
we
seems
agree.
broadly
Yeah,
besides the
but like
point.
that, how is that related?
Well, hold on, because I really do want to.
I'm just agreeing to begin with. I'm not responding yet.
I agree that bad actors are bad. I mean, it's sort of tautological in that case, right? And as an anarcho-capitalist, right, I'm going to oppose that. I'm going to say we shouldn't do that. We should intervene and stop that from happening when possible. Because I think there's a strange sort of mentality when people talk about capitalism where they assume that it means maximization of profit as opposed to a private model of production, right? Like private ownership of the means of production and private investing, etc. Individual.
Well, actually, we
ownership.
probably should have got this out of the way at the beginning. But how would you define capitalism, and then we'll give our version.
Oh yeah,
Just
okay.
like how-
Private ownership of capital.
Yeah, private
Okay.
ownership of capital, individual ownership, that sort of thing, right?
So we would define it as a mode of production in which goods are produced specifically to be exchanged for a surplus value, which then
Sure.
translates into a profit.
I would
So
agree with
it's
that.
just
kind of.
it's in a simple way just a way in which we produce things. It's not
I
a
would-
property relation like you seem to imply.
Well, I
Okay.
would kind of agree with that, but not entirely, because I think that like the surplus value point is a little bit weird, because this goes back to the whole. This actually goes back to labor theory of value, right? Because another thing that contributes to the production of goods is capital goods, right? Tools that we actually act on, and you could say, well, those tools, they were produced by labor, granted, but once they're already produced, they can change hands multiple times, right? So that like when you have a capital good in your possession, right, and you transact it, there's an opportunity cost. You're not going to give it away for free because it provides some utility to you, even if it's minimal. So, in a sense, capital goods are, for now, I would say a universal input, right? Like, or near universal, because I guess there are some things where you just have human labor and you don't use a tool, but
Doing
they
a
certainly
dance,
aren't
for example.
yeah, like they aren't really big definers of our.
But even then, you need
yeah,
space.
But just
which...
to get caught up in the, just to not get caught up in the weeds here, like Marx directly addressed the input of capital goods. I mean, that's what Marxists a lot of times call embodied labor. But I don't really
Marx
want to get
addresses
too much
it,
into that.
though, is not the important.
But it doesn't contradict the labor theory of value at all.
That's fair. Okay, sure. I really just want to get to the actual like pragmatic points here. So, with respect to surplus value, right? A lot of people have this sense like, oh, well, this is just extra money. That's not exactly true, right? Profit is a return on investment. It is the material resources, labor, and scarce inputs that people sacrifice to produce or facilitate the production of a capital good. And then the reason they do that is because the capital good will produce more through its lifespan than if it weren't made. So you actually earn a return on it. So I agree naturally that, yes, okay, if we're going to say that it's that's capitalism, right? To invest and earn a return on your investment, and that return being profit, then yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good thing. That's where I think our major disagreement comes from, right? But that doesn't mean like I don't think that we should allow terrorists to like blow up buildings and kill people and stuff. Like obviously I oppose that.
Okay, so like my problem is that you sort of like laid out how like profit is like a return on the thing. I mean, that's fine. That doesn't really address whether or not it can contradict the interest of humanity, which was basically like my central point.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can say that like, well, we should stop it, but like that's not really addressing the point, because if I say capitalism like incentivizes bad things, and then you say, well, we should just like try to stop those bad things from happening, well, that's not really a counter argument to the notion that capitalism creates these negative, these harmful incentives in the first place.
Okay, so I've got a problem. I've got to clarify in that case. So my claim was not that any action which is profitable to the person taking the action is going to be towards the interests of humanity to whatever degree we can determine that. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is that in capitalism as we define it, right, so private ownership, where basically comes down to where a situation in which people exchange rather than steal. If you have a situation in which you have to exchange something you have for something someone else has if you want their thing, right? In those circumstances, right, then it's true that the social desirability of something highly correlates with whether it's going to return a profit. Now, if you go outside of that into a system which I don't advocate, in which theft is permitted, right? In which theft is permitted. In that situation, it is true that a lot of the time it's going to be profitable to perform tasks that are going to be a net negative for humanity, because you don't need to do something for someone else in order to get their thing for yourself. But I mean, I would say that is basically the situation that you guys are advocating for, which is you don't believe, as far as I know, in the strict private property rights that we do, and therefore in some situations it is acceptable for an organization or something like that to take something from someone against their will, therefore not necessarily meeting the criteria that would make profit in line with human values.
I just think, okay, so like your argument about well, this only like happens because of like government or whatever. It's based on this assumption that you threw in there.
I didn't say anything like that.
And additionally, I want to
Wait,
point
wait, wait,
out.
wait, wait. I'm sorry,
Wait,
but
wait,
that was a lot of shit, and I think we should respond to that.
I
Okay,
understand,
but I
hold
didn't.
on.
Just
Okay,
hold,
wait,
but
okay.
I
Can I
didn't. I
clarify?
just want to be clear that
Can I
I didn't
clarify?
say that. Right? Don't
Yeah, this-
don't
Okay,
respond
so
to that,
wait,
strawman.
You
Hold on though, hold on, because I got to clarify a little bit because it seems
Okay.
this like this response that you're going into right now too. There's a distinction between the argument that there are cases where one party may profit at the expense of another person versus capitalism greatly incentivizes those cases relative to other models. Those are not the same argument. I concede on the former that those are the cases, and I furthermore we should oppose those cases, right? We're anti-theft. We're against those incidents. But the latter is a different argument, and if that's like we're not there yet, right? We're addressing the first point that we oppose theft, we oppose violations of the NAP broadly speaking.
Okay,
and
so
I just wanted to also just clarify the thing that you said at the start was that I'm saying it's always the government. That's false. There are other institutions and groups and even individuals who perform the actions that we oppose here. So with that out of the way, sorry about the interjections. We'll shut up now.
yeah, okay. So my argument against that would be you're sort of saying, like, I'm sorry, but it felt like you made an argument at the beginning where you said, like, well, it is true that in some cases, under capitalism, there are exchanges wherein one person like doesn't have to give something to another person, but just like get something in return. But you're
Like
opposed to
No.
that.
No.
But like, I don't. Oh, did
Well, no,
What
I
was
want
the
to
argument you're
let you
making?
keep talking, but that's not at all what I'm saying.
what were you
I
saying
mean,
then?
I concede that 100%, and I would argue in every economic model there are cases where people steal from each other.
Yeah, but no, that's what
Okay.
I wanted to clarify. You said that there are situations under capitalism in which it's profitable to harm someone in order to benefit yourself, i.e., steal from someone. And so I'm not saying that that's a facet of capitalism. I'm saying that's a facet of existence, right? That
Right.
it is always going to be the case
Okay.
that there are harmful actions that someone could take to benefit themselves. Right? There's no
Okay,
system in
so-
which that is not the case. But
Is that both?
I can
so that's
say,
like your guys' argument.
yeah,
like that's
but I
essential?
can say that capitalism, as we define it, right, the strict adherence to private property means no stealing, and so therefore, the reason we advocate that is an attempt to avoid those bad situations we're talking about.
Okay, so a couple things. So for one, you say like, well, people doing things which may benefit themselves but harm humanity is just a facet of existence. Well, okay, but I think capitalism both creates incentives to do that and gives people the means to do that in situations where otherwise it wouldn't. So like, for example, take like something like the example I was at earlier, say a capitalist is like selling arms to like a radical group to like destabilize the Middle East. Well, they're doing that and they're able to do that under capitalism because they privately own that company, and what they do isn't subject to democratic decision making of the mass of people. And so they're able to do that. They have the means to do that because that company is privately owned and they have a profit incentive to do that.
So-
Whereas under, say, communism, the broad like society would have democratic input into whether or not that company does that. And obviously, if the mass of people get to make that decision like democratically, they're not going to sell arms. So I
Really?
think like you're sort of missing
Yeah.
that point.
Really,
here.
hold on, because that seems
Yeah,
like a
the
really
populace in the
strong
US is
assertion.
like mostly
You-
anti-war. Like
You genuinely believe that the democratic system precludes acts of instigation against other people?
precludes, no, but doesn't incentivize to the extent that capitalism does, yes.
Well,
I
how so?
That's
Because it's a
wrong.
lot easier for instigation to take place when one company that's privately owned that has a profit motive to instigate something is able to just do it. It's obviously going to be less likely to happen if the broad society gets to democratically have input into whether or not they
There's-
do that. Like
there's
that's
a
obviously the
presupposition
case.
I don't
there,
think that's
though.
obvious. In fact, I think that's the opposite of the truth.
Yeah, I same. But
Yeah.
there's two main reasons why I would argue that. I mean, first of all, there's a weird presupposition there just being allowed to do it, right? Our model opposes people like bad actors, right? I just want to restate that. But second, yeah, like first of all, there's the consideration of costs, right? So you can say, for example, that one person gets to make the decision, and so they're maybe they're all they're all bad and evil, and they're like, I want to hurt other people. But they also have to bear the costs as an individual as well. And whereas with the democratic system, each individual voter has to bear like essentially no cost for their ill will. So if they want to go to war, for example, they could just vote for it at no cost to them, and then it's other people who go and fight the war and die and lose all that money and all those material resources, etc. So
I think even that's an oversimplification.
Pardon?
I think even that's actually an oversimplification. I want to differ from Bones' point slightly. I do agree that would be the incentives if the individual voter actually had a noticeable effect on what happens. But because he doesn't, the effects for a voter of the actual behavior of the government he's voting for or the organization he's voting for are basically trivial, right? What the government actually does is not going to change based on your vote. However, you do have some private benefits of voting a certain way, right? You might feel good about yourself, right? It might be that if you vote for the Good People Party, then you're a good person and you'll feel good about yourself. But given that there's no feedback from what actually happens and that vote, like when I vote for some really harmful policy that sounds nice to me, or if I vote, I vote to go get those bloody people over there who we hate and aren't they so terrible, I don't have to bear any of the costs, and I don't even have to really think about it that much because like my vote's really not going to matter. The only thing that it's going to affect me is I'm just going to like feel, I'm standing up against those bastards over there, right? So
emotional gratification.
Yeah, the emotional gratification of voting in terms of benefits vastly outweighs any actual change you're going to have to how the democratic organization functions, and therefore the actual functioning of the democratic organization is not going to be rational.
Okay, so a couple things here. So for one, Bones said, well, I mean, that is bad if a company wants to sell arms to radical groups, but our model opposes bad actors. Yeah. But I mean, that's kind of useless. Let's be honest. Like, that says nothing about whether or not your model would actually prevent those bad actors from being able to do what they have a financial incentive to do.
Sure, I agree.
You also said that that in a private company, people have to bear the costs, whereas if people want to vote for a war, they won't face the costs. That seems to me to be the exact opposite of what the truth actually is. Because if you're a private company and you sell money to radical groups, or you sell arms to like radical groups to destabilize the Middle East, I mean, what cost are you really facing? It seems like the cost, because say we go to war as a result, as often happens, the cost isn't being faced by you, the capitalist. The cost is being faced by all of the civilians and all of the soldiers who are being killed in that war. And those are the people who broadly would be making the decisions under a communist society where the economic decisions are decided
hold
upon.
on, now we're changing things completely, right?
No, we're not, because my original point. No. I'm sorry, but you guys said a lot of things, so I'm not gonna stop that.
We'll remember the point. Though.
So the notion
on your own channel.
What did you say?
Well, if you're just going to proselytize, if you're not caring about the actual dialogue and exchange of ideas here, and you just want to get your talking time, then why even invite us to a debate?
I'm fine with dialogue. I'm not fine with you talking for like 15 minutes, and then as soon as I start trying to run through all of the 30 arguments I have to get for you, start talking over me. So if we're fine to actually have a dialogue, you should let me finish, and then you
can... all right. I reckon we should let him talk. Just go.
Okay, so that point about the capitalist has to bear the cost, no, the massive people have to bear the cost in things like war. So if you have the massive people making the economic decisions, then by your logic, those would be the people who would be bearing the cost largely of wars. Those are the people who actually...
But they're not, because they're foreigners.
Hold on, Bones, let him go. I'm writing these down.
The final point about like votes not mattering and like emotional gratification being like the one incentive, it's like, even if that's true, do you think that people get more emotional gratification out of saying, yes, we should go to war with these people because it will give us like some resources?
Yes.
Like, no. And like, second of all, the idea that your idea of like votes not mattering, that might be like true technically, but that doesn't mean that that's a sentiment that's like internalized by like the mass of people in society.
It's not. That's part of the problem.
Okay,
you
well
gotta
then that
stop.
Mathematical reality is not.
previous argument.
not
But, okay, that's all I had to say. So if anyone
Okay.
else has to,
Yeah, no, that's fine. So I've chucked down basically what I saw as the three arguments. There's one that the mass of the people will bear the costs for the capitalist wars, not the capitalists.
for the most part, they're
Yeah.
more likely to, at least.
Yeah, you questioned whether there really could be emotional gratification for war, and you said, well,
no,
sure.
I didn't say that there couldn't be emotional gratification for war.
Okay.
I said it would seem like there would be more emotional gratification. In your average case, people wouldn't feel more emotionally gratified in choosing to go to war simply because we could get some resources from it.
You questioned the degree to which there is emotional gratification for war, then. And three,
Sure.
that you said, well, sure, votes don't matter technically, but most people think they do, so they'll still behave as though they do. Right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Pretty much.
All right, I think we've got the 3 points down. Bones, you wanted to hit the first one because you were chomping at the bit for that.
Well, yeah, I'm a little frustrated by this because, okay, so if we're talking about whether or not to go to war with people over there who are the outgroup, they're not going to be the ones making the vote on whether or not to go to war. So saying that they're the ones that are going to be affected, no, that's wrong, right? If everybody in the U.S. has a vote on whether or not that the U.S. should bomb the Middle East, it's not going to be people in the U.S. who get bombed and face the consequences of that.
Yeah. I think that in a situation where you've got people voting on whether to go to war, and the people who want to go to war will take actions in order to sway public opinion enough in order to justify the war, right? So if that means convincing enough people in the right places to get the right representatives in order to go to war, then that's what they'll do. If that means if it's a strict majority, then they'll just have to convince a strict majority. But the fact that votes don't matter is the reason that it's going to be quite easy for them, because they don't actually have to override people's people's rational side, right? Because people's rational side, if they're being rational, they're not going to think their vote matters anyway. The only time where people are going to be caring deeply about their vote is when it's on an emotional grounds. And social desirability is a big part of that. So what I'd predict is that you're going to have, in a democratic system, you will have a powerful media, which is going to be used to try to garner support for any profitable foreign intervention. And the reason that'll work is because people aren't considered to own themselves and their income. So if you get that public support through votes for this war, then people are going to be taxed, have their money taken from against their will, and they're going to be conscripted, forced to fight overseas. And that's going to happen because you get people's emotions running rather than the rational side of them, because the rational side isn't needed for your vote. Being rational is irrational if you're voting.
Can I just ask, are you arguing against communism or liberal democracy here?
Both. I
Yeah.
think communism is just the natural
Democracy,
conclusion of democracy.
Okay, so in what communist society to you is there a privately funded media which is
Didn't say it
trying
was
to
privately
convince
funded.
people to go to
Doesn't
war
have
for
to be
profit?
privately funded.
Could be state funded.
It could be state-owned.
Okay,
yeah.
in which communism to you is there a state? Let's begin with that.
Okay, so
It could
most
be
people's
worker
definitions of
co-ops owned,
communism,
It doesn't matter.
most people's definitions of communism would include a state. This is also going to depend on how we
Well,
define
most
a
people's
state.
definitions of communism is wrong, so...
Well,
Fair enough, I
definitions
guess.
mean
Okay,
what
fine.
people words mean what people say they mean. So let's just make sure we're talking about the same thing, right?
Well, within
so,
Marxism,
okay.
the theory, no, they have strict meanings in order to have the theory retain logical consistency.
Lord.
If you
Yes,
start
that is your
changing it, like-
definition. Now I
well,
agree.
you're arguing against Marxists, aren't you?
Yes,
So you may
okay,
want to use
hold
the
on.
Marxist definitions if you want to actually argue against the theory.
Different
Otherwise, you're
Marxists
just
will
talking
disagree
bullshit.
with you, All right, I can find some
They
people
won't,
who
they
will.
won't disagree with me on this. I
Well,
can
you'd
assure
say
you.
that they're not real Marxists.
Journalists not, hang on, do journalists not exist in your Marxist utopia?
Of
Is there no
course,
news?
but that's
Is
not
there
what
no
I'm talking
news?
about. I'm not.
But that's what
Okay.
we're talking about. That's my point. We're trying to get to this
Well,
point.
no, because
where
you're talking. Okay,
we're talking
So
about
the
journalism.
point here is
You
there
said
will be some
private
you're not talking about
organizations.
journalism. You're
Doesn't
talking,
have
There
to
will
be
be
private.
talking
there will
about
be media.
large private. You're talking about funded media outlets with vested interests, run by
Yeah.
people with vested interests.
Yes.
Yes.
Are you saying that? Hold on.
Yeah,
You're saying that
so you're
gonna
not
have
arguing
news
against the
that
Marxist conception
nobody
of
has an
communism.
interest?
Okay, so how does your
What?
media work when
Not
how
to
do you have a
invade other
media
countries for
when
profit.
no one has any interest in what the media does? How do you construct a media in that such a way?
Nobody has any interest in what the media does. That seems like a straw man. What we're saying
Okay.
is that you're not going to have a situation like we have now where powerful, wealthy companies are able to use their financial sway to sway the media into pushing the narrative that they want them to push. Like that's like the whole like idea behind like Chomsky's conception of like manufacturing consent is that because of the hierarchical and unequal way in which our current economy functions, private powerful companies are able to have disproportionate sway over media narratives. But under a communist society, when there isn't the same private ownership over the means of production or private companies at all that have the potential to use any money to like sway this media narrative, this isn't going to be the case. Like that's what we're saying.
Hold on.
According to us,
that
the
doesn't
media
matter.
today is an arm of the state, essentially. Like not
I
obviously
agree.
literally.
Yeah, we
but it's a
agree with
tool
that.
used
We
by the
agree,
ruling
but-
class.
But
I don't know
that's
about the
largely
ruling
irrelevant.
class, but the
enact its
state,
interests.
sure.
Hold on, because we agree. Okay, that's sure. All that's correct, right? But that's largely irrelevant because there's two things. One, just as a fact, because this is one of the things I think is really important. We have to look at how like systems work, how the mechanism of reality actually functions, and build up from there, right? And as much as Marxists and communists and socialists of different brands argue in favor of like abolishing hierarchy, that's a non-starter, right? Some people will have more influence than others, even if
We're
you
not
got rid
talking
of
about
money.
abolishing hierarchy.
I understand, but even if we get rid of money, there's going to be other ways to influence the journalists, and the journalists themselves will also have a great deal of influence because they're the ones who get to say what they're publishing.
Yeah, sure, you're
Right.
right. But
Now
here's the thing: to us, media is like fire, right? It's just it. Well, maybe not fire, but it's a tool. It's a neutral tool that can be used for different ends and different gains.
Yes,
right.
we agree.
So we're saying that under communism, the incentives to go to war in the first place would not exist, and therefore the media would not be used as a
that makes
tool.
no sense.
Yeah,
to do
and
this
also
in the first place.
So that is
just
clearly false.
Just to like directly address what you were saying, because you said there will still be ways to like sway the media and influence the media, and the media will still have influence itself. But I mean, the problem is no, because the media will be directly subject to public oversight, as it's not a private company that can
Okay,
be swayed by like
let's-
people's money or whatever.
Okay, let's go step by step then. Okay, first of all, this claim that there's no incentive to go to war under communism, that's trivially false, unless you're arguing that like somehow the parts of people's brains that make them dislike other people are just removed somehow. This idea that there's no incentive is just abject nonsense. There may be no profit incentive because you've abolished profit, but that doesn't mean there's no incentive, right?
But
I also
the
think there will be a
people
profit
over
incentive.
there, I want them to die. That's an incentive.
Right, but for
We've
us,
lost
those
Xexizy.
incentives, like, oh, I don't know where Xexizy went. Maybe
But, like-
he just glitched out or something. But I
he
mean,
needs
for
to
us,
he needs to reboot. He said he lost his audio.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Should we wait
But,
for him
like-
to come back? I suppose you can, Mouthy, you can do your response because he probably
Yeah,
is in tune with it.
So for us, wait, I'm sorry. So the that was what was the last thing that you said?
It is trivially false that there's no incentive to go to
Oh,
war under a socialist system or communist system.
Yeah, okay. So for us, you know, you can point to other incentives like just xenophobia or whatever. But for us, those incentives typically, in the vast majority of cases, are created ad hoc by capitalists who are pursuing this for a profit motive.
Okay.
So
That's
what-
a really fundamental
that's also
disagreement. Are we
truly false.
hold on? Are we really saying that people don't have any natural inclination towards tribalism?
No,
Because
my claim doesn't.
you said those okay, because you said that xenophobia and stuff that's a function of capitalism. Am I misunderstanding you there? Maybe I am. That sounds wrong.
Because Bones said that the profit motive isn't the only incentive to go to war, and because that's what Xexizy said,
I
and
would actually
he said,
expand on that a bit more. It's not even the largest incentive.
okay, well, we're gonna have a disagreement there, but like you brought up other incentives, saying like, oh look, there's other incentives to go to war. For example, there's just like a xenophobia. But what I said is that it seems to me that in the vast majority of cases in our current society, these other incentives like xenophobia are created post hoc by capitalists trying to justify profit-driven war.
See, there
For
you go.
example, capitalists
Xenophobia is
have a
created by
financial
capitalism.
incentive in invading, say, Iraq.
We never said
then
it's
they pay off
created by
Fox
capitalism, dude. We're
News.
just you're strawmanning us.
I'm
We're
not
saying
trying
that
to.
it's
He's
created
okay.
by
Let me
capitalism.
explain to you why it seems to me like he's saying capitalism creates xenophobia. He said he's talking about xenophobia, and then he says, and these incentives, presumably referring to xenophobia, are created post hoc by capitalism. That sounds to me like he's saying capitalism creates xenophobia.
Yeah, so to be clear, I'm not saying that xenophobia is created by capitalism. Xenophobia has existed long before capitalism. I'm saying that xenophobia is frequently weaponized by capitalists to push people into being complacent with going to wars, whereas they otherwise wouldn't be.
Sure, I circumstantially that's true, but there's also socialists that argue the same. I mean,
I don't care what other socialists argue. You're debating Xexizy.
You should care. That's the point, right? If we're going to make a tit-for-tat comparison between two systems, and you're just going to ignore the incentives that are created under the system that you're proposing, then because I'm happy to concede that yes, a lot of profit-seeking people will try to manipulate the general public into conflict. Granted.
I fundamentally disagree with
you disagree that the majority... Wait.
No. What I'm disagreeing with is because he said that, well, other socialists say, and I said, I don't care what other socialists said, and he said, you should, because you can't ignore the incentives that your system creates. But I don't think that you could infer the incentives that a socialist or a communist society would create based on what people who call themselves socialist currently say on Twitter. Like, that's just you just cannot extrapolate that.
I mean, no, I'm not. So I'm okay, because this is very frustrating now. I'm noticing there's like a little bit of a different level of standards, because the capitalist who wants to go to war and kill a bunch of people, they're not a capitalist. They're just calling themselves a capitalist because they're a thief, right? Like they're not advocating a free market and exchange and the accumulation of private capital.
You're equivocating here, because I wasn't talking about capitalists as in people who agree with capitalism.
Okay, but
that's about people who own capital.
Point. If we're gonna play this game, if we're gonna say, oh well, capitalists, like this is very frustrating. If you get to define all the terms, including our own advocacy, then we literally can't have a conversation. Right?
Wait, so do you disagree that capitalists, like people who own private businesses, exist, or are you just like
people who own private businesses exist? They're not necessarily capitalists in the same way that Danny and I are.
Okay, right? That's just gonna be a difference in terminology. Like I've never, like you can say,
I agree, it is. You're right.
That's literally his point.
So what would you prefer we use instead of capitalist?
I don't care what you use. All I care is that there's a consistent analysis of the terms here, right?
Well,
because
for us, it's consistent. That's why I'm asking you, though.
Okay,
we're
not saying no. So you're misunderstanding that. He's not saying that we want you to use a different term or something like that. He's not complaining about the terminology in that way, right? The point is that when we're talking, you can tell. Presumably, you can tell contextually what we mean by the terms. Can you not?
Right. So,
not with that last one, in all honesty. No.
Okay. Can you try to explain it again, Bones, without using that term then?
Yeah.
Okay, without the term capitalist. Okay.
Sure.
Anti-communists. Okay. There's this general sort of ideology with them, right? And so, if we're going to point to some anti-communists and we'll say, look, they have bad motives, I'm going to point out and say, here's some socialists that have bad motives. And if you're going to say, well, they don't really count, Well, then my response is that those anti-capitalists you're appealing to, or anti-communists that you're appealing to, aren't actually anti-communists.
Right. Okay. So,
Right,
but that's an
Actually,
equivocation.
Mouthy, do you mind if I respond
Yeah,
to
go
this
ahead.
one? Yeah, so I think really what we're trying to talk about when we talk about war under capitalism is that there are systemic ways in which war under, let's just say, liberal democracy can be incited. Support for war can be incited, and there are profitable incentives to go to war. And this, of course, ties back into what we were saying before, how profit isn't necessarily the same thing as something that's good for society, but we've moved past that at the moment. Now, so that's what we're saying. Now, we then say that because the profit incentive wouldn't exist under communism, that you would no longer see people going to war or trying to convince people to go to war for those same reasons. However, I will say, if people magically wake up one day and everybody decides they want to go to war, then regardless of what economic system we're under, they're going to go to war. The same thing happens under anarcho-capitalism in the NAP. If everyone wakes up one day and they want to go to war and they say fuck the NEP or the NAP or whatever it is,
Yes.
then that's just what's going to happen.
Yes.
But what Marx is interested about is what are the material conditions that cause people to have these behaviors in the first place.
Yeah. And one more
main
thing.
one which we see with war is the profit incentive.
I understand that point entirely.
Can we let Bones respond to Xexizy first?
Yeah, I have like one more thing to add on to that, just to respond to what you were saying, Bones. Because I agree with everything Xexizy has said 100%. I would also add that because you were saying like I was being inconsistent about like the use of like, because I'm saying capitalists would go and do this, and you're saying, well, they wouldn't. And then when you say socialists might want to do it, I say, well, those aren't real socialists. When I said capitalists, I was referring to owners of private property having a financial incentive. I wasn't talking about people holding your ideological predispositions, just randomly wanting to.
Yes, I understand that. Okay, great, awesome. Okay. That's the problem, though. So when you said, yeah, you're right, like that's the important consideration in this case, right? It's not just, oh, there are bad actors in the system. Yeah, because it's a nirvana fallacy otherwise, right? No doubt there are people who are business owners who are going to do bad things under a capitalist societal model, okay, a free market societal model. I agree. What's relevant is to what extent the mechanisms of the societal model facilitate either bad actor. And my argument is that socialism has some as well, contrary to this denial, and which are unique to socialism, I might add, that are specifically characterized by the democratic model of decision making. Okay, so there are cases where the likelihood of going to war is uniquely higher in that system than it would otherwise be if those mechanisms were not employed. So that is what we're debating, and that's what I mean by you should care about what other socialists and ideologues in your system think, because they're going to get a vote.
I would also just want to. So if you have a instituted your socialist system, right? Some people will still have different incentives and different preferences, and receive different amounts of income in whatever form that you want to talk about it, right? Like so. If you are able to get the society to support you to a higher degree, then that's you just benefited, right? So therefore, you want to control the democratic process to some degree, right? That you have some incentive to do that. I don't think that you're going to get anywhere by simply trying to remove all incentives for people to benefit at the expense of others, because I think that's always going to be that's always going to be a facet of reality. There's always going to be plenty of situations where that's going to be the case. I don't see how changing the form in which these benefits will come, whether it's in money or whether it's, I don't know if you favor work vouchers or whatever decision-making process determines how much you get. There's always going to be some incentive for you to benefit at the expense of others. I instead propose another solution, which has been what people have come to since time immemorial, and actually arguably several animals have come to, which is instead of reducing the incentives to take the bad actions, raise the costs of taking those bad actions, right? So I think that I oppose the democratic system, which can tax people and can conscript people. If we remove that, now people are going to have to bear the costs of, okay, you want to go to war, you're going to pay the army, you're going to bear all of the public opinion blowback, you're going to have to fund all of the weapons and all of that sort of thing. Now, that's going to massively increase the cost of wars and therefore reduce the number of wars. That's exactly the same as how it works in smaller situations, which is just criminal justice. If you kill someone, we take you to jail. Therefore, people will know that, and therefore the cost of performing that bad action is higher. So instead of trying to come up with a way of removing all incentives from life such that no one will ever take a bad action on the basis of those incentives. Instead, try specifically to increase the costs of taking the bad actions is my alternative proposal.
Yeah, okay. So I have a few responses. So Bones said that incentives to go to war can be uniquely high under socialism. I'm curious as to like a case in which that's like true.
I can outline one for you if you want, but
yeah, sure.
Now or after you make other points?
I guess I'll make the other points and then you can outline. Okay, so as far as the other points, so you said that you can't get rid of incentives for people to do things at the expenses of others. We should instead try to like increase the cost of war by saying that you have to like weather the public blowback or whatever, and so on.
You mainly pay the armies and pay for the military weapons, which is not the case under democracy. You don't have to do that. You can take the stuff from the people.
Okay, so... All right, so a few things. I don't think that there is like a complete... Well, first of all, I never said that you can get rid of any incentive to do anything at the expense of other people. What I did say was that when it comes to, like, my original claim is that the profit motive often is a unique incentive which incentivizes people and enterprises to do things which are against the interests of humanity. For profit, like the profit motive does this in cases where in the absence of the profit motive, this wouldn't be the course of action taken. So that's like I never made the proposition that you can get rid of every like incentive ever to do something that might be bad. I just think that the profit motive, because you said like we can't just change the form, but like I fundamentally disagree with that framing that like the profit motive is just one form of incentivizing bad things, and in the absence there would be other forms of incentivizing bad things that would just take its role. No, I think you can very clearly conceptualize cases where in the absence of the profit motive there would be no incentive to do certain bad things. Like
a lot. You're really repeating yourself now. Like that was a verbatim thing you said 5 seconds ago, and I really want to address that because like early in this debate we talked about how money is a commodity like any other, right? So when you say in the absence of a profit incentive, what do you mean? Like, are you talking about
if there wasn't, I'm sorry, but like I'm sorry, but if you don't want me to like have to repeat myself, then try to understand the pretty basic points that I'm making. In the absence of the profit motive means basically in the absence of the profit motive, meaning if there was like, it's, yeah, I know it's pretty simple to explain. I agree.
No, that's not an explanation. X is X.
Yeah, it's like
you just repeated yourself, like the word.
Okay,
like
hold on.
Yeah, I know it is pretty funny that I have to like.
Okay, so here
you don't have to say X equals X, right?
I don't know what else that could mean to you.
Okay, so I want to try breaking it down. Give me a sec. Give me a sec.
Let me try.
You want to try, Bones? Okay, fine. I'll let you.
I don't know how to do anything other than repeat the definition when you're.
We're talking over each other too much.
This might help. Okay. So here's a couple things that I think you could mean by the absence of a profit motive. Okay, I think you could mean like the abolition of money, and so people don't do things for money because there's no money, right? So we're not going to use the monetary system. Is that correct? If yes or no?
Yeah. I mean, basically.
Yeah.
Yes.
Communism is
so
a
great.
mode of production in which
then-
in which goods are produced for their use value rather than to be exchanged.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
What I mean, exchange is a use value. That's
Not
But
by the Marxist definition.
okay, in any case, let's slide past.
Wait, sorry.
Let's
no,
slide
no,
past that.
I'm wrong.
Hold
I'm
on,
wrong,
let's
I'm
slide
wrong.
past that.
Ignore
We're-
that. Ignore. Sorry,
we're-
you're right. Exchange is a use value. Ignore that. But
But we're avoiding the point. Bones, can you finish the main thrust? Because this is a tangent.
right. Because the point is then, okay, so we have no money, right? There's that's not the thing. But that, like, there's still profit, right? There's still, I mean, not strictly speaking in that sense, but there's still the same incentive structure that we're talking about when we talk about a profit motive, right? There's still people who are going to benefit materially in some way. They're going to get things that they want by taking
Right.
certain actions. So
Exactly. There's some people who may individually benefit for those things, and under capitalism, those people run
Under
private
every
businesses.
system.
They can take those. Okay, so say you have a private
No.
company that has an interest in arming these radical groups. Under capitalism, they can just do that because the means of production are privately owned. They privately own that company. Under communism, like these economic decisions would be subject to
They're
public
democratic,
oversight.
right.
So just because a few people might have an interest in doing something, that doesn't mean they would be able to do it under communism, or under capitalism they would be. That's like the whole entire point.
Oh, see, no, okay. So hold on. Just to be clear, though. Just to be clear, we agree, though, that under communism, there are still going to be cases where a person can take action for their own gain at the expense of another person, right?
Of course.
Of
Yeah.
course. Right.
I do. Well, I said like 20
Communism
minutes
isn't a utopia.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
I said like 20 minutes ago that would be the case. So if
Yeah,
you
we're
don't
just
want me to-
reiterating and
Please
clarifying. We're
continue
just
myself.
reiterating and
Please try to
clarifying so the
listen.
points are listed out. Right? Let's
So
chill.
here's the basic gist of, because now we'll go back to the systemic aspect, right, with respect to socialism and like not even socialism. I'll just say democracy broadly, right? True, pure democracy. One of the big problems with it is that the costs and benefits are not proportional to the amount of influence that a person has. So you can conceive of a system. Let's say we have a democracy of 3 people. Okay, it's going to be Alice, Bob, and Charles. Okay, and let's say each person has $1, and war just so happens to cost $3, right? But they value it disproportionately. Let's say Alice and Bob really want to go to war, but they only want to go to war like $1 worth of war, right? What they have. Charles
value
really
war at
doesn't
$1.
want to go to war. He hates war. In fact, he would actually probably spend $1 to stop the war and not go to war. Well, when they vote, Alice and Bob get their way, but not proportional to the amount that they actually chipped in. The excess is subsidized by Charles. If they had to pay their own costs, they wouldn't go to war because the war isn't worth it to Alice and Bob. But if they can steal from Charles to facilitate it, then it is.
I mean, Mouthy, like, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I'm tempted to agree with that. Almost just say that one, the profit incentives again under communism wouldn't exist in the first place, so it doesn't matter. And two, even if you want to say under anarcho-capitalism, even if you want to say under anarcho-capitalism that it becomes more expensive, then yeah, but it still exists there in the first place, which is our central point here. Remember, is that profit.
Yeah,
dude, you've got to let me finish, man.
I know, but
Bones,
I
Bones, let him go, dude.
All right.
So our central point here, remember, is that profit isn't always necessarily aligned with what's beneficial or even useful to people, right? So that's the point we're making. So you're talking about how we can negate it and make it happen less, but we're saying the fact that it exists at all is our point. Like, we shouldn't try and make war, occur as little as possible. But you have to understand the point that we're trying to make here, right?
Yeah, like you're basically just saying, like, under the society I envision, war would be more expensive, so it would be disincentivized more.
No.
You're basically just raising the bar for how profitable war would have to be in order for people to pursue it.
It's like you're
Whereas,
giving up our point. Like,
right, yeah, was for Xexizy and I, like, people wouldn't have a financial incentive to do it in the first place.
Okay, so one, in this hypothetical, I'm going to try to clarify a point real quick. Maybe this will solve it all. Dollars are just an abstraction for any kind of cost or gain, whether that's emotional or like labor or whatever. It doesn't time, etc. right? That's just I'm just using a sort of a medium. We can call it
Use
one
utils.
unit of cost. Right, utils. Yeah, exactly. Utils. Perfect.
Yeah.
Right. The war costs 3 utils. Right. Alice and Bob each value the war at like $1, right? So or 1 util. They value it at 1 util. If it
and they each
one
can
util,
provide one. They each can provide 1 util.
they each can provide 1 util, right? If they combine their assets, they don't have enough utils to actually manifest the war. They may actually, well, they have enough to manifest it, but it's not worthwhile. It's not actually a gain to them at that cost. But if they can expropriate from Charles, the guy who does not want to go to war, they can steal his util, then they can go to war. And so
Well,
war
the
will
questions are... Sorry, are you done?
But no, because I want to explain there. That's the distinction between the two systems. A democratic system, they go to war. A non-democratic system where everyone gets their own utils and gets to decide how to spend their own utils, they don't go to war. And it's not making things more expensive. It's the same cost in both systems. It's 3 utils either way. It's just in one they go to war, the other one they don't.
Right.
Okay. So I think if you assume, okay, so remember that communism is about what is useful for people fundamentally, right? That's what it's based on. While capitalism for us fundamentally is based on what is profitable. Now, going to war to steal other people's resources, other countries' resources, is always going to be profitable, assuming you can, support the army and properly gain and exploit those resources.
Big
right?
assumption.
Then you can use those and you can expand your own businesses back at home, and that's always going to be an incentive for you. Now, back to communism, war is only going to be useful in that case if you have a scarcity of something and you want to steal it from somebody else with force. But one of the prerequisites for communism existing in the first place is a relative abundance of resources that capitalism has allowed us to have, right? Because if the point is that everybody, thanks to capitalism, can have food and shelter, right? That capacity exists. So the use for forcibly, invading another country and stealing their resources and let, as well, that being the first thing that people think of instead of having some kind of trade for resources instead, that they both might have scarce, that use is very rarely, if ever, I would assume, going to exist is the point. Mouthy, do you agree with that?
Yeah, pretty much. I would also add, like, in your example, like the people have like a small amount of utils or whatever. And so because they can't coerce everyone else into giving them the amount of utils that it would make, or that it would take in order to wage a profitable war or whatever, they don't do it. But that example, that theoretical, is sort of begging the question, because you're presuming at the outset that these people don't have the amount of utils to wage a profitable war. But of course, that's not always going to be the case. Like Xexizy and I said, you're not actually getting rid of a profit incentive to go to war. You're just like raising the bar for how profitable a war would have to be in order for people to engage in it. And like this idea that, like, I basically agree with everything Xexizy said about how there wouldn't be these incentives to go to war under communism because of abundance and so on.
But you just agreed that capitalism produces abundance.
What did you say?
Capitalism produces abundance, yes. But capitalism is what industrializes us from feudalism and socializes
I get that's the story. Production. I get that's the story, but
and then it's communism that essentially takes.
That's not addressing the point. You're saying that. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of things. First of all, you're never going to get rid of incentives in general, right? When you say, we're going to get rid of the profit motive, there's
when
two
did
things...
we say that?
Well, you said we're going to get rid of the profit incentive to go to war. That's
not the same as saying that we're going to get rid of all incentives.
But that's
That's
exactly.
okay. See, that's what I'm
Why
saying.
you neutral?
You're exactly making my point,
Okay,
right?
I'm
So
sorry, but you remember like
no,
like
hold on,
30
no, dude,
minutes
you've got to.
ago-
You're just gonna have to let me talk. The exact thing you're saying is my point, right? There are two sort of definitions of profit that we're talking about here. Like you're trying to get rid of the profit motive in the sense that you want to get rid of money, and so people won't do things for monetary profit. But there's still going to be things that people want, and human wants are infinite, so there's going to be scarcity in that sense, and people will want to do some things to have the things that they want, right? And they believe that whatever costs they have to incur are worth the benefit that they'll get from that thing, and therefore they take those actions. That is a profit in the other sense, not in the dollar sense, but in the util sense, right? You're gaining some utility by taking that action. Whether that is done through money or whether that's done through any other system, that doesn't seem to change the fundamental fact that there will sometimes be the incentive to go to war in order to appropriate stuff from the people you're going to war with.
But
yeah,
the point that I was making is that capitalism will always have this incentive because it always wants
So
to
will
make
communism.
profit and
Yeah.
expand. And the point is that yes, this fundamental that that is trans-historical, right? This fundamental incentive to go to war to steal somebody else's stuff, regardless of what that stuff is, right? Is always going to be there. But what we're saying is that the existence of a communist society would more or less negate this this altogether. Because
Why?
again, because one,
No one's gonna
people
want
will have the sorry, I'm getting stumbled up on over my words. So one, the fundamental needs of people will be met, right? That's what capitalism has allowed us to do. Two, you're saying people have infinite desires and stuff, and that is true. But do you really think that people are going to have frivolous infinite desires, which will be on the level that can spur them to go to war?
Yes.
I don't think they will, because without a sorry.
We've reached a really fundamental point
No,
here.
we have to let Xexizy finish speaking,
Okay.
and then I have a few
All
things
right,
to say.
if you repeat
Well-
yourself, I'm gonna interject. So go ahead.
Dude, I only have to repeat myself because you keep making me make the same arguments by not addressing them. But okay, Xexizy,
anyway,
finish.
let's
I'm trying
talk
to right
about
now.
the stuff, not about the conversation.
Don't shut me
Okay.
up about trying to address a point and then criticize me trying to address the
Xexizy,
point.
are you finished? Are you finished saying what you're gonna say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that going to war is a very, it's a bad thing. People generally do not want to do it. I think we can agree on that. So it's going to take a lot to actually bring people to go to war. And again, in a society where you don't have people who are constantly trying to make profit for profit's sake, and you have people who have the fundamental needs of life of food and shelter provided, I think it's incredibly unlikely, if not impossible, that people are ever going to see the need to actually go to war, especially if they just want something. There are so many other ways to get something with another country than just going to war and taking it.
Right. For
There's
example, you could trade with them.
there's another really fundamental point to be made here, which is
Hold
that Danny was saying that basically, well, even if you don't have like profit is just an abstraction, and like the same incentive will exist in another system, whether that come in the form of just like labor vouchers or resources or whatever. I was trying to argue earlier that I fundamentally disagree with that characterization.
Okay.
Profit isn't simply an abstraction of like an incentive that would exist in the same form in a different mode of production. Profit has tendencies and needs that don't necessarily exist in like a communist mode of production or a different mode of production.
I agree
For
with that,
example,
though.
as Xexizy brought up earlier, in feudalism, the working day isn't the same as it is under capitalism, because in feudalism, you just have to work to the point of sustainability and then you're done. Whereas under capitalism, you work to pay off your wages and the natural resources, but then you have to work an extra amount to fulfill the specific needs of like capitalist expansion and so on. And then when it comes to like the idea of like war, I could give specific examples of how the mechanisms of profit specifically facilitate the need to like go to war in many cases in a way which wouldn't be encapsulated by just saying that it's an abstraction for like other incentives. For example, there's the notion of like the tendency of the rate of profit to fall that Xexizy brought up earlier. There's the fact that if capitalists can't profit, or capitalists have to constantly expand and make their businesses bigger, and so capitalists might have an interest in going to war with other nations in order to expand. Whereas if in a communist society, this concept of expansion and profitability didn't exist, that there wouldn't be to the same degree an incentive to go to that war or whatever.
Before you go into this list of examples of like the ways in which capitalism might incentivize war, I thought we addressed this before. This is
There's
really,
only one.
This is really okay. There's only one, sure. Either way, this is really, really, really fundamental. So this is really important. You have to look at both systems if you're gonna compare them. You can't just say, well, capitalism has this fault and then just ignore the systemic example on your side, right? So with respect to
But what was our original point? Tell me.
that, I mean, I don't know. What do you mean?
You've made
Exactly.
a range. No, you've made a range of points.
Made a lot of points.
No. The very first point that we came right out the gate with at the very start of this, that Mouthy
Of the
said,
whole
what did he say?
debate, or of just this
At
little
the very
last
start.
at the very start of the whole debate.
The reason we've been discussing this for like half an hour now, the point
Yeah.
we've been trying to hammer home, what is it?
That the profit incentive leads to war, or where are you? How far back in the debate do you want to go?
That the profit incentive doesn't necessarily line up with what is useful or good for society.
Okay,
That is what
that
we're
was one
saying.
of your first points.
Yeah, and that is what this whole discussion about war has been for us.
Not
right?
necessarily,
So when we say that the profit
That's not
incentive
right.
can cause
But,
war,
look,
that
I
is
disagree
us
with you about
trying
the
to back up
conversation.
our original point.
I disagree with the original that
Yeah,
that's the whole,
saying-
where the whole point thing comes from. But again, let's stop talking about the conversation and talk about the thing itself.
saying that well, you could come up with examples in socialism where there might be a unique incentive for war. That doesn't negate the original
It's
point.
whataboutism. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's literally just whataboutism.
No, it's not whataboutism. Hold on.
I'm not.
It is.
Comparing two systems and therefore pointing when you say, well, I think that there's this problem with this one, and you say, well, I think there's this problem with this one. That is not whataboutism. That is what's necessary to compare X to Y. You can't just say, look how high the number X is, therefore X is greater than Y. You need to look at Y too.
Well, no, because if our initial point was that the profit motive can incentivize things which aren't necessarily good for humanity, and then we give an example, say war, and you say, okay, well, that is true,
Yes.
but there might be examples in socialism where it can lead to war. Then you're just conceding the original point and we're moving on to a different.
Hold on, yeah, but I am. But we've said this many times. We are conceding that the profit
Yes.
motive will incentivize people to go to war, right? It's just that I don't think.
But broadly, that the profit motive often incentivizes things which are detrimental to society. So you're conceding that
Sure.
point.
I don't know about
That
often,
the profit
but
motive
I
will,
remember
yeah.
trying to argue against it.
substantially, yes.
So no, we're
absolutely.
not. We've never been trying to argue against that. If you go back to originally what I said with regards to this, it's that profit in the sense of benefiting from something, right? The broader sense of profit, not just monetary profit, but literally any kind of profit. Any situation in which you benefit more, the benefits for you in some action outweigh the costs. Right? Any time there are obviously some situations where you're going to do so by imposing costs on other people. Right? That's something that I've said from the very beginning of this discussion. So saying that the profit and motive will sometimes result in, yeah, I agree. Yeah, there will sometimes be bad actions that people are incentivized to take because of profit. Now,
Right, but like I said, profit's
Okay.
not just an abstraction, like this abstract.
yes, it is.
Example.
No, hold on.
You're using like profit,
word.
using profit to be an abstraction.
I'm
of,
using it in a
like-
broader sense than you are, but I'm explaining why
Right,
it's valid to do so.
But as I said, that the capitalist profit can have specific mechanisms
Like what?
which facilitate, well, like I said earlier, like the idea of expansion or
Well,
overaccumulation.
what do you mean by capitalist profit in this situation? Sorry, hold on. What do you mean by capitalist profit? Do you mean profit under a capitalist system as we would
Okay, yeah.
define it?
So to
Or
be
do you
really
mean,
clear-
well, by capitalist profit, you just mean monetary profit?
So to be really clear here, so what I'm saying is You made the argument that, yes, it's true that profit can lead to things being detrimental, but that will always be the case because
Yes.
profit is just an abstraction for people getting more than they put into something. And there'll always be an incentive to that. But what I'm saying is that if you look specifically at capitalist profit in like the classical
Define
sense, like
it.
revenue minus
He's
cost.
doing it.
That's the
No, he's
classical
not.
definition.
No,
Yes, I
that's
did.
defining
It's revenue
profit,
minus
not
cost.
capitalist profit. Right. Okay. So here's my question. When
well,
you say, let me be clear about my question. It's a very simple one. When you say capitalist profit, do you mean profit in the capitalist system as the people you're talking to, would define the system we advocate? Profit within that system, right? Or do you mean monetary profit, right? Any profit in terms of money?
I mean the former, because a lot of
Okay.
the situations
that's-
in which I say profit can lead to harmful things, these situations wouldn't exist if we were defining profit as just like any situation in any system in which someone benefits more than they put into something.
Okay,
Because I think capitalist
In that
profit,
case, you're just
specific
wrong.
mechanisms
In that case, I no longer
capitalism
agree that
can
capitalist profit.
facilitate situations
we clearly have
The
wherein
definition. Stop.
harmful things are pursued,
The definition.
whereas otherwise they wouldn't be.
Dude, hold on. The definition that you've just laid out, then I no longer agree, because if I agree that the profit motive can lead to actions like going to war. If you're going to say that profit motive in the capitalist system can lead to incentives like going to war, right? Strictly speaking, that's just tautologically false. If you're talking about the system I advocate, now if you're making the different claim that monetary profit, right, and when you have a situation in which you have money being exchanged, and that therefore monetary profit can lead to the incentive to do bad things, then yeah, I agree. But I think that equally applies to any other system, right, where you have incentives. So those are the two different things. Capitalist profit can include things like going to war. Tautologically false. That's not the system I advocate. But if you're not talking about tautologies, you're talking about the actual system in the real world, then you're saying monetary profit, money being this exchangeable, widely exchangeable commodity, that can be the incentive for which you go to war. Then yeah, I agree. But so anything could be.
No, but that's my problem, is that anything couldn't be, because my argument was that there are specific mechanisms of capitalism which create an incentive to go to the war, which otherwise wouldn't exist.
Okay,
profit...
pause. We're there. Okay, we're on the same page now. There's unique qualities to the monetary system that incentivize war. Okay.
Yeah.
Give one example and we'll address it.
Yeah, okay. I gave examples before, but that's fine.
Let's focus on one of them.
Yeah, okay. So, for example, the idea of like expansion.
So, like accumulating more wealth?
Yeah.
Like,
going into someone else's country and stealing their resources.
Like, specifically to fulfill, say, the needs of competition. Whereas, say, if you have capitalist competition, people might have an extra incentive to go into that in order to outcompete other capitalists. Whereas if there wasn't capitalist competition, there wouldn't be as much of an incentive.
There would be a different kind of competition, right? You'd be competing to control whatever organization controls your society, because you want to have some kind of democratic structure which controls what your society does to some degree, right? Am I wrong in saying that?
Yeah.
You're okay. So then the competition would be in order to control what that organization does.
Yeah, socialist competition.
Right.
Wait.
Okay, but
that's in the absence of democracy. So if you're going to say, in the absence of the monetary system, money would not be the incentive to go to war. Well, sure it wouldn't, because that's not what determines what the society does. So obviously it wouldn't be. But similarly, in the absence of democracy, controlling the democratic structure would not be the incentive to go to war.
Wait, how is controlling the democratic structure of like what?
So your society is controlled by democracy, right? If the people vote for something, then that thing shall be, or people attempt to do it. Yeah?
Yeah, generally, sure.
Okay, sure. So in that case, if you would benefit from which everyone would benefit to some degree by controlling that democratic structure, right? Controlling whatever kind of organization Presumably you don't vote every day on everything that ever happens. You'd re-elect some kind of representatives. Okay, controlling those representatives. Even if you did vote every day, fine, just controlling 51% of public opinion in the voting booth specifically. Then that's the competition. People are now competing to try to control what this organization does. Right, and now that's the incentive.
Well, I mean, no, because if you have like a truly democratic structure, there isn't going to be any competition to see who can gather sway over the democratic system.
Why?
Because
why?
there would be no way to do that.
Yes, there would. I could just have a platform. I could have a prominent platform in which I spread my ideals, and my platform is just louder, and it reaches more people, and therefore it has more influence.
Yeah, I could convince people that
I
could convince people that it's better for everyone.
Having disproportionate influence over the ideas of the people in common.
I mean, maybe if you can do that under communism, you can do that under anarcho-capitalism.
Exactly.
Then you can convince everybody to pay for war.
Yeah, so that's why
then it's still unique. It's still that something capitalism only has, and is this profit thing.
No, it is not, because there's no democratic structure, right? The unique thing.
But you've just said if you can convince how is that not democracy? If you can convince everybody to go to war, and everybody agrees to go to war.
Wait, so you're saying the market's democracy?
If you do it through no. I'm saying literally.
Well, then it's not democracy.
I'm saying people themselves. I mean, democracy in this case is just a formality, right? Of going through the
money
vote. But
is just
if you can, not for us, because here's the thing: when we talk about capitalism, we're talking about the mode of production, and that being in order to always expand capital for its own sake. That is the unique incentive under capitalism.
And the unique incentive under democracy is to control the democratic structure.
Yes, but capitalism has this incentive too.
No, it does. So okay, hold on.
If you convince everybody under capitalism to go to war, they will go to war.
Only, what you're saying is correct only if you're willing to abstract the incentives, right? If you're willing to just do what Mouthy was saying we shouldn't do, apparently, and just generalize.
I didn't say you can't abstract incentives. I said you can't abstract the profit incentive because the profit motive.
So it's special pleading. Okay, look. So when I say, well, the profit motive still does exist under communism if you broaden the definition of what profit to mean just hold on. Okay, so if you broaden the definition of profit, right, to if you use the definition that I'd use and most economists now do, then you're going to have those same incentives under communism or socialism, right? Those same incentives will exist, but if I'm not allowed to use that broader definition, if I have to be really specific and go monetary profit, that's what we mean. Okay. But then similarly, I can restrain the definition of democratic profit. You probably don't want to call it that, but democratic benefit, right? Being benefited by the specific actions of the democratic structure, right?
Fine.
That does not apply to anarcho-capitalism, for example, right? That kind of the control of the democratic structure does not specifically apply. Now, I know you're going to say, right, but a similar sort of thing does apply where you can still convince people and it's not voting, but it's different. It's okay, but exactly the same way. A similar sort of thing as to the profit motive applies under communism, right? It's still the allocation of resources based on your influence by succeeding in whatever system you have. But you seem to be saying we can abstract one but not the other, and that's arbitrary.
No. Okay, well, let me, Mouthy, do you mind if I take this for a moment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me try and restate my original point about capitalism then in a way that might help break your misunderstanding here. So, how about we forget money for a moment? And there is no money under capitalism, right? It's a pure barter economy, for instance.
Sure.
Now, this economy still works on accumulating resources, making investments in production to get more resources out of them, or producing more resources that you can trade for more resources than you put into than the resources you put into production, right? Now it's this fundamental need to always have more resources in order to stay competitive, reinvest into production to produce more, to lower your prices or be able to push your competition out of the market, right? This is a fundamental characteristic of capitalism, of always expanding your resources. And whether you want to call that money or whether you want to call that the actual physical resources themselves, it's the same principle. Under, again, something like feudalism, you would grow how many of crops you had to grow in order to survive the winter, and that'd be that. And if you accidentally come out with a surplus, then that's great, but that's not what you were always systemically going for. It's a different dynamic there.
So
Now the reason that I'm saying capitalism has a unique incentive to go to war here is because war will always provide an opportunity to amass more resources than not going to war. And because amassing resources is an objective in and of itself under capitalism, this is always going to be a incentive under capitalism, regardless of if you're using money or not, when it wouldn't be even under feudalism.
Sure. Okay. Well, so okay, I think I understand your argument in this case, right? So, under communism, there's no need or incentive to accumulate additional surplus resources, right?
Yes.
Like you said, you only grow enough food for the winter, and if you get a surplus, excellent, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What happens if the winter's worse than you thought it would be?
Oh, well, then you're fucked, aren't you?
I guess so.
If you don't have any food, you die usually.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's when you would want
Oh shit.
a stock of resources to be able to break into. But this isn't this for us isn't included in that definition of surplus. So even though if you create a surplus that you're not going to immediately consume, you can save that for later. That's great, but that's still something that's useful to you.
I understand. So
you're still only producing, even if you're making a surplus in case the winter fucks up the crops. This is still fundamentally, we're only creating what we need or theoretically need, not just what fulfills the needs of expansion.
I understand, but here's my question to you. Okay, here's the problem that I guess that I'm having here, because I think there's a disconnect in I guess in the order of operations here. Like there's a formula or whatever, and there's a missing piece. So we'll steelman this a little bit. So you're saying, okay, under communism, you only get what you need with risk assessments factored in. So like tornadoes and blizzards and wolves eating your flock. Okay. Let me ask you this. Is survival a need?
Generally, people consider it to be, yeah.
Right. Okay. I just want to make sure, because, definitions are a little counterintuitive at times. Anyway, so let's say somebody's 100, okay, and they need like literally an artificial heart. They need an actual like cybernetic implement put inside their body to keep it beating and keep them alive. That's a need, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So my argument is that we don't have that yet. If we stop expanding capital goods and learning how to innovate and produce things at a lower cost and things like that. I
never said stop innovating.
Hold on.
I understand. I know you didn't say it. That's why I'm saying there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect, right? If we stop doing those things, though, we're fucked. So we're going to still expand. We're still going to continue to build capital goods. The disconnect seems to be right here, where you have a belief that under a capitalist system, and specifically we're talking about voluntary trade, not theft, that profit in this case is not done to facilitate that end goal of some material need that a person has, contextually speaking. I think that's false. I think that under a capitalist system where we're talking about voluntary trade, all trade is facilitating that outcome, including things that may be deemed frivolous needs, such as entertainment. Because if somebody is, for example, a worker and they're going into a factory and toiling for 8 to 16 hours a day or whatever, they might want to come home on the weekends or whatever and watch their favorite television show to unwind. And if they can't, they become depressed enough to potentially kill themselves. And then their productivity that's materially useful or socially desirable just doesn't get done. So
that's all because I couldn't watch Netflix.
Is
anyway
socially desirable.
No, I get you. You're right. But like, all I would say is that from the perspective of the capitalist, that extra surplus isn't fulfilling a need. What, indirectly, I would say it does, because then once they make that profit, they reinvest it, and that creates more use values that people consume. Sure, but from the perspective of the person actually employing people and making the money, they just want the money, right?
But isn't that a good
I
thing?
don't think that's.
Yeah,
I don't think that's
a great
true.
thing.
But
That's
even
an
if it was,
amazing
it seems
thing.
like a good thing.
But it comes with all these caveats, which lead to, as we've explained, inherently unstable modes of productions, and it can lead to, again, if your only goal is profit, then that can lead you to have incentives to do very bad things, like go to war. Or hey, even if we want, this is something I would have preferred if we were talking about the whole time, to be honest, way more simplified example than war. Planned obsolescence, just making your products break sooner than they have to, so people have to buy more. Isn't
So
that like
we can-
directly not useful in any
Well,
way? But it
hold on.
still
Yeah,
makes more money.
We can touch on
Let me-
things
Okay.
like
I just have to get
Let's
one more
touch
thing
on-
in, because
Okay,
there's
one last
also-
thing. Okay.
there's
trying
another element that we need to talk about here, which is like, because now we're on because you made the argument that like if something's like there is no needs of capital which like exceed what people in general just need.
We have to go back like an hour. Like I really
This is like
Okay.
5
Yeah. No.
minutes ago,
This is
like,
this is
come on.
switching topic a little bit there.
No, this is what you said like
Mouthy.
5 minutes ago.
Yeah,
You
but
said
hold
that
on. But
there's
Bones was
no-
about to respond directly to what Xexizy
yeah,
said.
and
So
I'm-
let's
yeah, hold
let
on.
him do
Wait,
that
wait.
first, and then let's
Ralphie,
move.
let him respond to that.
we can get to specific mechanisms like planned obsolescence and whatnot, or incentives to war. What I just want to clarify in this point, this is why I'm trying to restrict as well. It's why I said specifically when we're talking about voluntary trade, and I mean voluntary because I understand that a lot of socialists say, well, if the outcome is undesirable, like I don't get to eat or whatever, or I have to go homestead in the wilderness, that's not really a choice. But I mean, there's no coercion, there's no threat of reprisal if they don't comply, there's no act of force. Okay, I want to just clarify that those transactions, all of them, facilitate human needs, even if it doesn't facilitate the needs of the capitalist himself, the investor himself. That doesn't negate that it facilitates general needs, and if anything, that's the beauty, because now he doesn't have to be altruistic. He can
Okay.
You're definitely right.
But-
Like, capitalism provides needs. Like,
Yeah, but the
how
problem
do you think we get food and shelter? Like, obviously.
the point that I was literally
Right.
about to be
We
making
agree, though. We
Wait,
agree.
Sorry. Actually, I think Mouthy should have a chance to speak.
Yeah,
now.
Well,
hold on.
actually,
Because, like,
let Bones
we-
finish because I don't think he quite made his point. I think that was a
I
precursor
just
to the
want
point.
to cement the agreement. Do we all agree that voluntary transactions for material goods facilitate human needs? That there's no such thing as a frivolous need in that context?
I would say yes.
Okay, cool.
Because
Sure.
otherwise, there's no exchange happening. Because people
Yeah.
buy things because they want them.
Right.
Cool.
Okay.
They sell them.
But
I
my
have-
point is,
So
sorry,
therefore,
Mouthy.
Yeah.
so exchange value is for need then.
So, okay, well, hold on, because I have something pretty relevant to say on this topic. Okay, so this is literally what I was gonna
Oh,
say.
just you disagree, and you're right
Exactly.
to articulate your disagreement.
Dude, come on.
Can you? Okay. This is literally what I was gonna say in response to what you were saying, which is that you're trying to say that like capitalism, the idea that capitalism has incentives which exceed like just general needs is wrong, because anything that makes profit, like that will be because of human needs. But
No.
my argument would be that capitalism, through certain specific mechanisms, creates certain needs or creates situations wherein people need to do certain things that again harm society. Let me give you an example. So currently, we are. I don't want to get into like the specifics of whether or not like climate change is a pressing issue currently, but
Well,
like,
you're repeating an argument I didn't make.
hold on. I'm
Let him
sorry,
finish.
I gotta
No, I know where he's going. So let him finish.
like currently climate change is an issue. Why is it such an issue? Well, in part because China needed to undergo a rapid investment in like infrastructure and so on, which shot up carbon emissions like fucking crazy. Why did they need to do this? Well, in part, it was because of the capitalist crisis of 2008, where because capitalists en masse couldn't profitably invest the surplus that they'd accrued, we entered into a crisis of overaccumulation. And the only way for China to exit that crisis was to like rapid investment in like certain like infrastructure programs and so on, which contributed massively to the problem of climate change. So that's just one example of how you can say, well, profit only exists in scenarios where it's fulfilling human ways, but
this is a pattern in the discussion that needs to stop.
scenarios where we have the need to do things where we otherwise wouldn't. Okay.
Mouthy, you have to stop doing that. You have to stop saying,
well, you have to
stop arguing X and then you have straw man and then arguing against that, because
you have to stop interrupting me and then not understanding the arguments I'm making. And
you're not addressing your points when you do that. That's my point.
Okay, so are you trying? Well, like let me just, because I hate talking about the discussion. I want to talk about the thing. Look,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Look, I think that the point you're getting at there is basically market failure, right? Like that the someone doing what's in his rational self-interest is going to benefit him and the other person if it's voluntary. But there are situations in which everyone can do what's in their own rational self-interest and do it all voluntarily, and nonetheless, overall, it harms everyone. Right, like a prisoner's dilemma kind of thing?
Part of it, yeah, that's one of the points I made, but like the broader I'm making... Like more specifically, I mean, that is sort of it, but like more specifically, I'm arguing against the characterization that under capitalism, anything that makes profit is just going to be like it would have happened anyways because it's just fulfilling a certain need. Because I reject that characterization because I think sometimes capitalism has the tendency to create scenarios where we need to do things that like otherwise we wouldn't. So like that's where I'm objecting.
I want to reiterate again. No, I'm not arguing. I'm actually specifically not arguing that the benefits that are produced by capitalism would have happened anyway. That's why I'm a capitalist and not a non-capitalist. So just to clarify, that is not what I'm arguing. What I actually was arguing the entire time is that there's no frivolous needs, right? There's nothing for which there's a market demand that is frivolous. Right? There can be market failure, there can be miscommunication problems, there can be faulty expectations of what a product or good will do, and people won't have their goals manifested that way. But this idea that one class of production that's what people need, and this other one is just plays no role in society, that's what I'm saying seems to be false. And I think we all agree on that, but you don't want to say you agree. So
so in that case, though, how would you explain planned obsolescence?
I would explain planned obsolescence as a byproduct of intellectual property.
How?
Well, so if two people can make the same commodity, right, and I make one that doesn't break, people will buy mine. IP prohibits
that. Right? If two people aren't allowed to make the same commodity, right? So there's two different firms are not allowed will be forced to stop from producing the same thing.
Property is, but
yeah, it's just a monopoly. It's a grant of monopoly on some product, and therefore you're going to have the failures associated with monopoly.
To be clear, I wasn't saying that, like when it comes to the frivolous, because I was actually directly addressing that point, but I can explain how. Because you're saying that there aren't frivolous like needs like that like go beyond what people need. I like agreed with that within the context of a capitalist society, but what I'm saying is that capitalism creates certain needs which are harmful when capitalized on or dealt with, which otherwise wouldn't exist if capitalism didn't exist. So like I'm sort of agreeing with you on a very technical level, but like that doesn't negate the critique.
Causing China to ramp up production. I think that's a tough one to acknowledge because I'm not that familiar with Chinese economics, but I should say the historical economy of China, because it's still the same economics anyway. But I just want to really go back to that point that was being addressed here. Like, so planned obsolescence isn't a byproduct of IP.
Sorry,
Like,
yeah, no, I get that, but my point wasn't why does it happen. My point was that how does it fit into the idea of profit necessarily serving a use?
Well, because so profit in a capitalist, in the capitalist structure as we define it, like let's forget. I'm going to not use the word capitalist because it's running into problems. I'll just say profit within the realm of private property and voluntary exchange. Right, profit that you get from engaging in those sorts of activities is necessarily for use. And if you have something like planned obsolescence, you'd have to give me specific examples. I've found that that's often an overblown issue. But to the extent that it exists in fields where there is a decree of monopoly, which is not capitalism.
Yeah, but
right?
that's just an
I'm opposed to
for why it
intellectual.
happens, though.
I'm opposed to intellectual property because it's a deviation from capitalism.
Oh, okay, so it just doesn't fit into your definition of capitalism.
Yes, right. Because it's very easy to tell whether something fits into my definition of capitalism. Is it private property and No, is it a private property and voluntary exchange? I can give you situations that are bad that capitalism uniquely creates, which I thought we were going to get one before with the market failure thing and like prisoner's dilemma kind of situations. But that's the
point I brought up earlier.
Yeah, so that I can address separately because that is like actually a flaw in capitalism. And I'm happy to address it, but I want to go with planned obsolescence first because that's not a flaw in capitalism. That's a byproduct of intellectual property, which is a function of democracy, right? People vote for the government to issue decrees of monopoly for certain products.
Well, again, I mean, even if we concede that anarcho-capitalism could never have that, which I don't think it
no.
would, because I mean
that wasn't my claim.
Sorry?
I'm just no.
Well, you're saying anarcho-capitalism wouldn't have planned obsolescence.
No, I didn't say that. I think that it wouldn't, but that isn't what I'm saying. That's not the relevant point I'm making. Right? The relevant point I'm making is that it's that what you're saying. You asked how does that fit into a definition, and I'm saying, well, if you simply consider capitalism as I do, just to be defined as the system of private property and voluntary exchange, then you would see that intellectual property, the progenitor of planned obsolescence, is not part of that.
Okay. His point. The point I was making about that though isn't again whether or not it would happen. I guess if you're just going to say it doesn't fit into your ideal version of capitalism anyway, then it's like. But it's trying to bring up examples of how profit and use can and do deviate.
Sure, and I'm happy to address those. I just don't think planned obsolescence is one. Because because I mean I could argue that, but again I don't want to start a whole extra thread here, you know. Yeah.
So I'll just concede that it won't, but because that's not really the main point I'm trying to go with. I'm trying to just bring up that they don't always necessarily coincide.
So the argument that I thought was being made initially, and maybe Mouthy, you were actually getting at that argument also, was that you'll have a situation. I thought with the pollution, that's right. That's a situation in which we tend not to apply property rights to the air, for example, because it's very cumbersome to do so. I think that we should to some degree, and that would solve some of the market failures there. But it's plausible that the air will just
You want to privatize air?
To some degree, it already is, right? So airwaves, for example,
sure.
where it's what do you call it? The wireless signals can go through. That's owned to some degree. Flight paths, things like that. You know.
Sorry, I just wanted to be clear, but
Sure.
go on with your main point.
Okay. So yeah, to some degree, it's cumbersome to apply private property rights to some things. One example is air, and you might say, well, this is a thing that people can create a cost to everyone via the air, and it can be small enough such that each individual person could be creating a small enough cost such that it's not really viable for us to apply private property rights in such a way that it's going to prevent him from taking that action, right? Like, so for example, me driving my car, maybe we'll have some negative externality. It's going to have some negative effect on everyone, but it's going to be such a small negative effect that you can't really hold me accountable for it. Like, I'll pay the cost of it, sure, but it's going to be tiny. But if we all do it, it creates a problem. Like the simple version of this is like the prisoner's dilemma. For those who aren't aware, it's when you have two prisoners and if one of them rats out the other one, he'll get a reduced sentence, and if not both of them rat out each other, they both get like a double sentence, and therefore they and if they rat out the other guy and the other guy doesn't rat him out, then they'll go free. They're both incentivized to rat the other one out, and therefore they both get the worst case scenario, because no matter what happens, it's better. Well, it's the second to worst case scenario, sorry. Those sorts of situations do occur, and they will occur under a market economy. But the point about it is all of those are based on externalities. When some action I take imposes a cost on you, you and I do something and it imposes a cost on him, let's say, right? That way it can be a voluntary interaction and someone else bears the cost for it. In those situations, there is a market failure. And I think that's a legitimate criticism of capitalism, but only as compared to nirvana, not as compared to a democracy. Because in general, it's the rule on a private market that people will bear the cost for their actions and will get a lot of the benefits from their actions. In democracy, it's the exception, right? It's almost never the case in a democracy where that the person taking the action is going to get the benefits and pay the costs, right? When I vote badly, I don't really pay the cost for my bad vote. You see what I'm saying? So it is true that there are market failure situations, but that is a better criticism of democracy than capitalism.
I'm not exactly sure what you're getting at by the last point. So
sure.
Just to make sure, just to sort of understand your argument. So you're saying that while it's true that in certain scenarios under capitalism, something can be incentivized, which sort of creates negative externalities on other people. Mm-hmm. But insofar as this is a problem with capitalism, it's more so a problem with democracy.
Yes.
But I sort of was missing out on how exactly that is more of a problem in democracy.
Because when you vote, that has a cost. If you vote badly, that other people pay the cost for your bad vote.
Right, and it's also what I mentioned before, right, earlier on, with the war scenario, utils, right? Or, I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can sort of structure it, but if it's obviously in the interest of 51% of the people to vote to expropriate the remaining 49%, right?
Okay, so I sort of take issue with what you're saying here, because it feels like when you're talking about an example of like in a democracy, some people might vote for things that might be detrimental because like they're not really paying the price for their vote. It would seem like, well, for me, part of the principle of communism, that part of like a notion of communism that I would advocate for, is people having influence over decisions to the extent that they're affected by those decisions. So like I actually in part take this from someone who I consider to be in general a radlib. But like say you're in a workplace, I don't think that the workers should collectively decide democratically on whether or not you can like put up a picture of your family where you work. I think that only... What'd you say?
Why not?
Because that seems like a bad idea.
I mean, granted, but I guess here's my problem with this. How do you measure the degree to which a policy affects a person without like them?
I mean, when we're talking about like a broad society-wide issues, I think society should broadly decide that.
Well, then it suffers from the same problem that we outlined before, right?
So like, could you give me an example of this like being a problem?
Yeah, it's
whether to go to war.
Well, it's in the interest of 51% of the population to vote to expropriate the remaining 49%.
Sure.
Okay, but like, what do you... Because I don't see, like, I mean, you can say that, but I don't see that being something that's like actually like manifested in reality, where like in a society, 51% of the people have like a big Zoom meeting and say, hey guys, tomorrow we're gonna vote and we're gonna find the other 49% of people and we're gonna collectively vote to like take all their shit. It's gonna be awesome. Like, I don't see this being something that could actually manifest in reality.
I
Like,
think
this
it actually
seems
would.
like a fantasy.
I
Happens all the
agree.
time. I don't understand
No,
what you mean.
actually, I'm going to agree with Mouthy that it wouldn't manifest in reality quite like that. And
Well,
the reason
strictly
is
speaking,
because
no. Yeah.
the reason is because you won't actually get the money if you vote. Like whether or not you vote to expropriate the 49%, will have essentially no effect on whether the 49% are actually expropriated from, right? But
Well, okay, but even if it did, do you really think
Well,
that
hold
that's a
on.
realistic scenario?
well, if it's
I mean,
dead,
I heard you
well,
say
no,
that.
that's kind of like
Let me-
warping the
So, wait,
stretching the bounds
maybe-
of the hypothetical. But hold on, Bones. That's stretching the bounds
I
of the
think it's
hypothetical,
opposite.
right?
I think it's the opposite. I think
But-
he's not really
okay.
examining it. Like, he's
All right,
not-
I'll
okay,
let you go.
if
I'll let
mean
you
by-
go.
Yeah, if you mean by stretching the bounds, you mean he's being too specific, then yes. Okay, I don't
Yes,
think
because
that,
I asked
I
you
mean,
for
I
a
don't
specific
think.
example to understand
Well,
it.
okay, but
So don't give me an example.
Okay, fine.
that's, like,
Everything the government does, literally every single thing that every democratic decision that is actually made involves that, because however many people vote, right? Whether it's a 50% voter turnout or a 60% voter turnout, whatever, however many people vote, a percentage of them agree with the policy and a percentage of them disagree with the policy.
Mhm.
The winners get their way 100% completely.
Right.
So
Yeah.
And the losers do
If
not
the
get their way.
enforcement of that
Communism does
policy-
have a critique of this as well.
if the
Yeah.
enforcement of that policy
I mean,
requires
look,
any,
I wasn't going to get into it because I mean, I think it's a bit too like heady, but actually, no, communism recognizes this exact same point and
Okay, how
says
does it
that
solve it?
it pushes for free association of individuals in a fully fledged communist society as opposed to democracy, which is, of course, one group of society exerting its will upon the other.
Yeah, I think Lenin talked
so
about this.
so just to be
Like
clear
Engels
then,
as well, yeah.
can I, okay, so you have a democratic system, can I opt out? So I could just say I'm my own group now.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
And are you going to
That-
steal my stuff?
Are you gonna expropriate my assets
is
if I
your
go out
stuff?
into the wilderness? If I go out into the wilderness and I form a township or build a little cabin or something,
Yeah, I mean, but why don't you do that right now and do
Well, because the
feudalism, you know?
government would
because the
still.
government will kill us.
Yeah.
That's the real
No,
reason.
I mean the
Yeah.
actual wilderness where like the government doesn't own shit. I don't know.
They
Yeah,
do.
they will
Wait a
kill
minute.
us.
Hold on. That's you understand that the government does claim proper.
You get my point.
No,
Like,
international. So that's been tried.
Even that example, yeah. Like,
Yeah, that example. They got hunted down by a government who
Thailand,
decided
yeah.
by Thailand who
So you
decided that.
think you couldn't go out
actually,
and decide
that's actually
to-
funny. But
Yeah,
You
no.
think you
Going
I
into
think it's
you
horrible,
can't
but
go out
sure.
and you could go out into the wilderness and build a cabin if they don't find out about you. But if you went out there with a group of people, right? Let's say some rich guy tries to do it. He goes and he starts setting up a successful society, and you actually get anywhere. Then as soon as you do that, then yeah, the government's going to come and say taxes, please. So yeah, no, the
no, I
government,
mean,
the
but
government,
yeah,
government
that's-
does
that-
claim
that is
ownership of
true.
all the wilderness.
okay, fair enough. Point is though, is that there'd be no material or otherwise incentive to revert back to capitalism under a fully because it's the same thing of like try and go out to someone today and say, hi, I'm trying to rebuild feudalism, do you want to be my serf or something like that.
So,
That's
hold on.
Like,
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. I'm gonna oppose that point on the
For
face of
me-
it really trivially. Yes, there is an incentive, and we'll just say I really like the idea, the label. I like being able to call myself a capitalist. So that's it.
well then go Mark.
I count as one of those people,
Okay.
and so there is an incentive to do that.
So
this claim that no
so-
one wants capitalism is false.
And you think that's
trivially.
going to exist on such a scale that it's going to
Yes.
Okay, so hold on.
functionally
Wait,
capitalist
wait,
society,
I just
Yeah,
want
which-
to let's forget about. I feel like we're getting into the
Yeah.
weeds here. Can we just
Well, hold on.
accept
just
for the
wanna
sake
say,
of
like-
argument that
I just wanna
that
make
we've got
something
some
really
people in your communist society, and they're like, you know what, communism sucks. I actually think that the ANCAPs were onto something. The whole voluntary exchange thing. I think we should go back to that. We're going to go out into the wilderness and we're going to form our own society, right? So the communists would have no issue with that, right?
Yeah. Okay.
I can't see why they would. But
Okay,
again, it's
so in that
yeah,
situation, like,
let
I
me just
don't
make a point.
oppose you on that solid of a grounds.
okay.
It's just the real problem I have with communism in that case is the seizing of the means of production that are already there. What's
well,
gonna
if we want to get into that,
what's going to stop
property has
it?
been stolen historically already. So if we want to do
So
that, it's a
demonstrate
zero-sum
it.
game.
Right? No,
Wait.
I agree. So if you could substantiate that, I'll join you in bringing those criminals to justice.
Okay,
and
have you heard
offering
of primitive
restitution.
accumulation?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so basically, in order for capitalism to function, you need a group of people who don't own means of production, so that they have to sell their labor power on the market in order to
disagree.
sustain themselves, right?
Yeah, no, I disagree.
I just wanted
No,
to
I
say
disagree.
real quick, like this isn't relevant to the debate, but we are coming up on like 2 hours and 20 minutes as far
Oh
as
Jesus!
Fine.
I
Okay,
don't
well
know.
Can
let's
we
let's
wrap
let's
it up
let's
then?
finish this point and then we'll wrap
I'll
up.
debate forever. I don't give a fuck.
Okay, so this is my,
No one's
this
gonna
is
no one's
be-
gonna watch it if it's longer than 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone will watch it if it's
I-
longer than 2.5 hours.
This is gonna be like my final statement. Like, if you guys are okay with like a proletarian revolution
Nope.
that
No.
were to like establish communism
Nope.
and abolish the
Nope.
commodity form under the precondition that like if 5 people decided like, hey, let's be exploited again, and went out in the woods and did it, and like you're fine with that, then
I'm not.
okay.
Nope.
Like,
No.
we can agree. If
So
you're
I'm not.
then
Yeah.
you're
No,
just
what I'm
arguing
against is the.
Let him
is-
finish. Let him finish,
Okay.
dude.
You're
Let him
just
finish.
Okay,
arguing
sorry. Yeah,
against,
I'll let you
like,
finish.
if you're
Sorry, I
just
missed the last
arguing
bit there. Can you say it again?
Yeah, okay. So if you're just arguing against the idea that we expropriate resources from the capitalist and try to build communism in the first place, I think we're just going to come up against a fundamental like disagreement in our normative ethical approaches. Because I know you're just going to say it's like intrinsically wrong because it like violates the NAP. I
No,
don't
we'd
really
never
get-
say anything like that.
No,
okay.
Yeah,
So
we're
Fuck the
not
nap. Fuck the nap.
okay, cool. So you're not like deontologist.
No, I'm
no,
a
we're
utilitarian.
consequentialist.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
great. Okay, well then we actually can have a
Then
discussion.
how do you not support democracy? Let's
Because
not-
democracy harms everyone.
No,
I
don't
was
worry.
saying- what I was saying is that like if you're just arguing against like the expropriation of the capitalists and the creation of communism in the first place, I don't know like on what grounds, because
Because stealing makes people worse off.
Yeah. Okay.
But
so
if we could argue
so
though that
if that
capitalism
was your-
makes people worse off,
let's
and that
just do our
communism would
finishing
make people better, then we could justify stealing to get to communism.
okay. So
Right.
Maybe.
yeah,
you
but I
have to
think
show
yeah,
that it's
but I don't think it
much
does. I
better.
think stealing is wrong, not because it's
Okay, well
fundamentally
then
wrong, but because it
let's
results in
not
people
even
being
talk
worse
about
off.
stealing then, because we
But-
just need to convince
no.
you that communism is a better society.
right, it's
But,
like
Yeah,
hold
but
on,
the
wait,
stealing's
wait,
part
no,
of
no,
that.
Wait.
Not
Yeah,
really.
No, it
with
is.
a caveat. No, hold on. Yes, with a caveat. Yes, with a caveat. You don't have to just demonstrate that it's better, but that in fact it is so much better that it makes up for the costs associated with that.
Yeah,
initial
I
step.
can do that 12 times over.
yeah.
Well, I wish you'd done it
Okay.
in this debate.
I wish
But
you'd done
okay,
it.
so Mouthy,
Yeah,
is that
okay.
your final comment then?
Well, no, okay. I want to like
Okay.
We should keep
do, like, a
going, but
recap.
okay.
Like you guys can like recap.
Yeah, how about we both have I have a proposal.
Yeah.
We should both have closing statements, but seeing as we went first with the opening, I think you guys should go first with the closing.
Sure.
That seems backwards. Well,
does
because
it?
you want to have either the opening or the closing remark, and by that standard, you'll get both.
Oh, I always thought
Wow.
you would want to have the response
Good point.
to either.
Yeah, no, I'd
So you got the
I'd rather
response
have
to
the
the
final
opening.
closing. So if Mouthy, why don't we do it
Alright.
staggered? Mouthy, then me, then Xexizy, then Bones.
Sure.
Okay, so
pressure.
yeah, so for me, I think that this like the debate, I didn't see any convincing case for your side of the argument. I think Xexizy and I both laid out a lot of flaws under communism or under capitalism. We laid out
Fuck, dude.
profit.
Freudian.
Sorry, I
Whoops.
cut the argument. Yeah. No, I
The
think
mask slipped.
Xexizy and I laid out a lot of arguments as to how the profit motive can contradict human needs in its unique way specific to capitalism. I think we laid out the instability problem, the inequality problem, a lot of other arguments, and all I really heard throughout the debate was just like this vague gesturing towards, well, what if socialism's worse, without any arguments against socialism to actually substantiate that. So I guess that's how I saw this debate.
That's a very
Sorry,
nice
Mark.
impression. Okay, so my turn. So I'm not going to say just generally how I saw the debate because I don't like talking about the discussion. In conclusion, I think that communism is fundamentally based on democracy, which I think is an inherently flawed system. I don't think that there's any good reason we should expect a democracy to result in good decisions or good allocation of resources. I think that capitalism, given the private ownership of means of production, means that the people who allocate the means of production towards modes that are going to facilitate people's needs and wants and wishes is going to result in the correct allocation of those resources. I think that your attempt to distinguish between the use and profit under capitalism only works if you accept things into capitalism that I would not advocate, and would advocate taking steps to avoid, like theft and war and things like that. Yeah, I would advocate that we have systems in place to laws, things like that, to prevent those sorts of things. And yeah, so that's a problem with that. And finally, yeah, there are some situations in which capitalism is short of nirvana. There, heaven is not to be here on earth. The problem with that, though, is that the same issues, like the market failure, is more of a problem under democracy than under capitalism. I think that people should bear the costs for the bad actions that they take, and they should get the benefits for the positive actions they take. Therefore, people will take actions that have high benefits and low costs, which is what we want. Okay, Xexizy.
Yeah, so I feel that the initial points that we laid out at the beginning, to recap, the profit incentive leading to things which harm and are not beneficial to society, the capitalism fundamentally being antithetical to free time, the falling rate of profit leading to unstable economies which capitalism reproduces, and I do believe there was a fourth one, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Mouthy, am I missing something?
I'm not sure.
Don't worry about it. Okay, those 3 points, I feel we laid those out at the beginning, and I do not feel they have been adequately refuted. So as far as I'm concerned, I feel that we've made our points, and that's all good. All I would say then is that it seems, quite interestingly, this isn't something I usually see with anarcho-capitalists, that it really does come down to just what system we think would be worse, almost, and whichever we can decide, if we can decide that capitalism is worse after all, then it actually is fine to seize the means of production, and so I think that's an interesting perspective. Lastly, I would say that a lot of your criticisms of democracy do actually hold some merit. I might point to the point that you just made about capitalism, that heaven is not for here on earth. Like I think democracy generally is going to be one of the best ways we can handle things. However, in a quote full communist society, as it were, I think we would move away from the type of democracy that we see today, and this is something that Engels and Lenin and Marx have spoke about before, because at the end of the day, again, it is violence. It is one section of the society opposing its will on the other, and a genuine communist society in which there is true free association of the individual, in which the only society in which true freedom can be realized. Yes, I do believe that we would move away from a lot of these criticisms you have spoken of democracy, so I feel a lot of them don't apply. So yeah, just to summarize, I would say we've laid out critiques of capitalism which I don't feel have been adequately refuted, and in that case, then I believe you're morally obligated to come and steal some of the capitalist property with me. So cool.
Okay.
So okay, I guess I get the last word. There's a lot of pressure, guys. So
don't fuck up.
First of all, I do want to say that I'm giving my last word in protest, and I would actually prefer to continue the debate. I think there's a lot of points that have gone unsaid.
It's almost 1 a.m. for me, dude. I'm sorry.
I understand. I'm just making my
You're just bitching.
I'm just bitching. I'm just complaining. Because I think there was an interesting point at towards the end of the debate, when you actually realized that we were having the argument that we were having, and not the one you guys thought we were having, and you were shocked and stunned to find out that we were consequentialist ANCAPs, not deontological ANCAPs. And I think it's really easy to just sort of make assertions about your system being this utopian social order in which no bad things happen. Oh, there's no incentive to go to war in this system, etc. but that's a far reach from actually explaining the relevant mechanisms, which we attempted to. I know that the response was that we didn't. I agree that we didn't refute every criticism of capitalism, but as Danny said, right, heaven is not here on earth. Many of those criticisms are apt. The point is, however, is they also apply to the socialist model, and that certainly wasn't refuted. In this case, even in Xexizy's closing remarks, he just said that they don't apply because democracy won't. It's just a motion. It's a temporary mode of allocation. So I think that we need to spend a lot more time actually debating the relevant mechanisms, get hung up less on Marxist semantics, which is really, really frustrating, and discuss how the systems actually work. And because in my view, capitalism, with respect to how systems actually work, yield the best outcomes. That's why I'm a capitalist and not a socialist. So,
Okay.
I guess that's it.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Well, thanks for the debate, fellows.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it was. I think this was originally you guys inviting me, but it ended up on my channel for some reason.
Oh well, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
That's all good. All right, I will
All right.
kill the stream.